The Rise of Iceland. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction, so please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter, and if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 101, Be Cautious in Doing Business. This time Hagrid and Olaf led a team to Europa to sell goods and purchase arms. They shoulder the hope of Wendland's rise. At the same time, they also took on several small tasks, such as investigating the wars of the Catholic League and the Protestant League spreading across Europe. What happened? Because now it is Denmark that represents the savior of Protestantism. Although this savior is about to fail, the rise and fall of Denmark is related to the choice of heir and others who live in Wendland. If Denmark plays triumphantly all the way, it proves that the kingdom of Denmark is powerful and invincible. In this way, Vinland will consider establishing friendly relations with Denmark if Denmark is beaten by the Habsburg alliance and throws its helmets and armors and then seeks peace. Then a weakened and bloody Danish kingdom will absolutely be unable to intervene in the issue of Iceland's ownership. Maybe wait a few years for Wendland to become full of wings. Heir can lead the Viking Thunder army to sweep Iceland and kill a carbine, which can avenge the grievances and segregate Iceland, and has the opportunity and foundation to spy on the Europa continent. Therefore, the outcome of the 30 Years' War has affected the future choices made by Heir on the island of Vinland in North America. In addition to the task of inquiring about the progress of the war, Olaf was also responsible for going to the Bank of Amsterdam to complete the business that Olaf and Kui negotiated last year. If it goes well, Olaf's Isidis root and other medicinal materials and the agricultural policy Quanchu and compendium of Materia Medica will get it, but Heavenly Creations is impossible, because Song Yinxing only began to write Heavenly Creations in 1634, and it was published in 1637. The book 8 years later is naturally impossible to buy. In April, Piku in Greenland led more than 1,000 subordinate slaves to build Nuuk, expand the territory, and constantly conquer the tribes close to Nuuk on the west coast, trekking away near, and making boats with wood for those far away. In the past, dozens of slaves were added almost every week, and a lot of fur was obtained at the same time. Nuuk's population increased, and Piku ordered the Akismo slaves to fish in canoes to provide food for everyone, and at the same time tried to catch and domesticate reindeer and musk ox while Piku worked hard to manage Nuuk. Hagrid and Olaf led the fleet as they approached Ireland. Quickly following the southwest wind, the fleet arrived in Dublin in mid-April. After paying the taxes, Hagrid and Olaf disembarked from the boat to visit the old patron, the big landlord Greyballs in Ireland. This time, Greyballs bought 50 skins and more than 200 other furs after seeing the goods. He also ordered 50 cans of queen honey. At the same time, he was full of praise for the quality of the goods delivered by Hagrid. The governor is also very satisfied with last year's deal. You can go to him, maybe this year he will buy some skins and queen honey. After he finished speaking, Bowers ordered the next person to take a few boxes of gold shillings. Hagrid and Olaf asked the sailor to pick up the box without counting, and then bid farewell to Bowers. After leaving Bowers' villa, Hagrid wanted to visit the governor's mansion directly, but Olaf stopped him and said, "The governor of Stephen pays much attention to noble manners. We have to change into clean and gorgeous clothes before visiting, lest we offended him by being rude." Hagrid did not resemble the character of Heir and Olaf. He frowned when he heard the words, and said, "It's too uncomfortable to see the noble master. Olaf, go by yourself. I will ask Polly and Bjorn to take someone with you." Wait until the afternoon of the same day. Olaf, who was wearing a new dress, brought Polly, Bjorn, and 5 sailors, who were also neatly dressed, with a skin, a white wolf skin, and 2 jars of queen honey as gifts to visit the governor of Ireland. Governor Stephen, who lives in the Dublin castle, is visited every day, but ordinary merchants and free men without aristocratic status are driven away by the guards. Olaf's arrival made the guards a little bit uncertain about his origin. After asking, Olaf smiled and reported his name and named it Iceland Jalrat. What he feared was that Governor Stephen had forgotten himself. After an hour or so, the guard came out and said, "The governor said he knows you, please go in, but he was taking a nap just now and he is still wearing clothes. Please go to the living room and wait." After checking a few people and asking them to put their weapons at the gate, the guards led Olaf into the lobby on the first floor, and then an attendant walked out and asked Polly and Bron to stand far behind Olaf, and at the same time asked the sailor to leave. Olaf the husband waved his hand to let the sailor put down the gift, and then smiled. This is the skin and other fur and queen honey I brought to the governor. This is a little bit of my heart, and it is also a gift I want to sell. The mate is a man in his 30s. He nodded and then asked someone to remove the gift, and then said, "Please wait a while, the governor will arrive later." After speaking, the waiter left. After about half an hour, the soles of the feet of both Olaf and Polly were numb before they heard the creak of the door being pushed open, and then Governor Stephen with tendrils was wearing woolen cloth. The robe walked in, saw Olaf, smiled slightly, and said, "Young man, we meet again." Olaf hurriedly bowed and saluted, and then greeted Stephen. Stephen replied with a smile, then sat down on the chair inlaid with rubies and motioned to Olaf to take his seat. After Olaf sat down, Stephen was not in a hurry to ask him why he was here. After chatting for a few words, he said, "Olaf, you Icelanders have some ways. The quality of skin last year was very good, and the big figures in the palace were also very satisfied. Are there any more this year?" "I want to buy more," Olaf said with a smile. "Thank you, sir, for your praise. We braved the wind and snow to go deep into the dense forest in order to buy some fur from the great and barbaric indigenous people. This year's luck is good and we have found a new source of goods. I brought more than 50 skins, some other furs, and more queen honey than in previous years. I have eaten a lot of a queen honey, and it feels really good. Compared with sugar, it is obviously better for your body. I think I can have your queen honey." Olaf was not excited when he heard this, because last year they told Stephen that fur and queen honey are very rare luxury items. www.wooxiaspit.com, so he knew what Stephen meant. Stephen must have thought that there were only a few on board Olaf's boat. 10 or hundreds cans of queen bee honey is nothing more than that. So he said so generously. If he knew that the Olaf fleet had 4,000 cans of queen bee honey, he would definitely have greed and murderous intent. After being shocked, Olaf is not a rookie, he whispered. "This time we have more than 200 cans of queen honey. Does the governor really need that much?" "Oh," Stephen raised his brows, looked at Olaf, and said, "You are really lucky this year. Let's stay, but this year's price is cheaper." Olaf did not show excessive pursuit of money. After bargaining with Stephen's butler, the unit price of queen honey was sold at 90% of last year's price. After the butler asked Stephen's opinion, he signed a contract with Olaf and purchased 200 cans of queen honey, 50 skins, 80 skins, 30 white wolf skins, and 100 reindeer skins. The total price was £2,000. Then in the evening, the butler took the soldiers and followed Olaf and others back to the dock to carry the goods, and at the same time paid more than a dozen boxes of gold and silver coins. The only people in Ireland who can eat so many valuable goods at one go are Governor Stephen and Lord Bowers. Other big merchants and landlords can also buy some, but Olaf is worried that selling it again will leak his fleet. There will be many troubles and dangers in the news of cherishing fur and queen honey in huge quantities. In order to avoid unnecessary troubles and crises, Olaf closed the deal after selling out the 2 deals of the governor and Lord Bowles. He only went to Raleigh Amor early the next morning and was going to ask him to do it again. Helped to buy a batch of young and strong white slaves to enrich Winland's team. Chapter 102, Irish Undercurrents. When Olaf visited Raleigh Amor, he did not see him. He only saw his butler in Dublin. Olaf inquired and found out that Amor was still far from the manor in the north and did not return. It seemed that something happened there. The many suicides of serfs made Amor and other northern landlords a little bit distressed. The butler knew that Olaf was the master's business partner, and worried that he would delay the master's major event, so he sent someone back to the north to report the letter, and asked Olaf to wait 2 more days. Olaf wanted to find other big landlords, but when he thought that he needed too much quantity, I was afraid that several other landlords would have to work together to eat it. The transaction would be a bit troublesome at that time, so it would be better to wait for Amor to come back. 3 days later in the afternoon, Amor's butler drove to the dock to invite Olaf and Hagrid, saying that the master had already returned home. Olaf and Hagrid hurriedly disembarked from the boat and left by car. When they walked into Amor's villa, Olaf and Hagrid saw Amor's face covered with weather and wind and sand on his clothes, and they knew that he had just arrived home. "Brother Amor, how are you doing?" After shook hands with Amor, Hagrid patted his forearm and said, "It looks like you haven't been very comfortable recently." Amor scratched his hair, straightened out the red hair, and then invited Hagrid and Olaf to sit down. Then he sighed softly and said, "Recently, Charlie and the Prime Minister asked Stephen to speed up the political campaign to persecute the Irish in Ireland. In the name of letting us convert to Protestantism, we continue to encroach on land wealth. It was better for Stephen to only work in the north, But recently Kilkenny, southwest of Dublin, has also been arrested by the governor's army. Several of them are my wife's brothers, and my sister's fiancé has also been persecuted. I have been busy rescuing them these days. Hagrid knew that Amor regarded himself as a friend, and he was depressed, so he could only vent with himself, an outsider, so he offered comfort when the three of them said a few words. Amor's butler brought beer. Amor drank a glass, and asked, "Are you still going to buy some white slaves this year? Now the Irish are homeless and lose their land and property. There are more and more people. If you are willing to accept their entire family as contract slaves, I think 10 pence can be sold for one person. I hope you can accept more poor people so that they can also have a way to survive." Amor's sincere request changed Hagrid's face and said solemnly, "Okay. Brother, you said we must do it. This time we plan to enroll more than 1,000 people. Although it can be used by the entire household, regardless of age and gender, there is no need for those who are sick and too old to go, because they may have to die on board if they can't get to West India, and even if they get there, they can't stand the environment of North America. Thank you." Amor volleyed and shook hands with Hagrid, then nodded and said, "I will help you identify with my heart, and your kind deeds will be remembered by the Irish." Hagrid and Amor perfected some more details, and then they were about to stand up to say goodbye. Amor suddenly cast his eyes and whispered, "I want to ask Brother Hagrid to do something for me." Hagrid glanced at Olaf, and then asked, "Brother, please tell me. The situation in Ireland is now unstable. Our ships will be checked by the guards of the governor's house when they leave and enter the port. So I would like to ask you to help buy some weapons and smuggle them back. Don't worry, the price will satisfy you." Amor coughed slightly and said, "Now that the English are pressing harder and harder, we Irish must prepare early, lest we never even have the chance to struggle in the end." Although Hagrid didn't understand politics, he also noticed that Amor had a rebellious mind, but he had nothing to do with the Englishmen. On the contrary, he had a good relationship with Amor, so he smiled and said, "Yes, I don't know what you want, buddy. What weapon? This is an order. Later, I will ask my butler to send you 200 pounds of gold as a deposit. The delivery location is still the same place. When you arrive, we will settle the remaining amount, no matter how much you buy." Moore took a piece of paper from his arms and handed it to Hagrid. While speaking, Hagrid casually saw the words matchlock gun, 12-pounder gun and other weapons on it. His heart jumped, knowing that Amor really planned to rebel against England. He was excited, and there was a kind of fear in the world. Feeling chaotic, smiled and put away the list, promising to do it an hour after Hagrid and Olaf returned to the dock. The 6 large ships slowly moved away. Sitting in the cabin, Olaf and Hagrid looked at the list in their hands and couldn't help but slap their tongues a little. 1,500 matchlock guns, 500 boxes of lead ammunition, gunpowder, 2,000 spears, 1,200 plate armor, 2,000 crossbows, 12-pounder, 10, ammunition. Comparing the price of weapons purchased from Amsterdam last year, Hagrid and Olaf simply estimated that the value of the weapons on this list was 500 to 600,000 guilders, and the gold coin given by Amor was only 200 pounds, all of which were replaced. The Dutch guilder is only more than 50,000, which is definitely far from enough. Should we buy it for them? Even if the money for Amor is too little. Hagrid looked at Olaf and asked. The two nephews and uncles have been together for many years. In recent years, Hagrid has asked and listened to Olaf's opinions on many things. Olaf moved his mouth, and then said, "Amor gave us 200 pounds of gold. It seems that your friendship is worth the money in his mind, and he won't worry about it anymore. But he said that he needs so many weapons, but he also said how much we need. www.wooksiaspit.com. Maybe it is also a guess that we can't buy too many weapons for him according to the bill, but we are going to give it. When the Viking soldiers buy weapons, they can buy more Amors together. Maybe they can make some money at that time." "Okay," Hagrid nodded, "I think it's better to help them. The English are really unfair to the Irish. Amor has always held a grudge against the King of England in London. If we help Amor not only get his friendship, but also earn a certain income, it will be in the future. It is much more convenient when recruiting contract slaves." Hagrid's words are true. Olaf thought for a while and added, "Yes, uncle. But you overlooked one point. If the Irish and England fight inwardly, this will benefit our position and interests in North America. New England will become weak and unable to pose a threat to us in the future, so even if my father knew it, he would agree to us helping Amor." "Yes." Hagrid thought for a while, clapped his hands and said, "Olaf, you really think better than me. We have to lend a helping hand to Amor both publicly and privately, so this year we will purchase major items. It's an armament weapon. The war in Europe is not over yet. I am afraid that all countries are still working overtime to produce weapons. Now is the time to buy weapons. Olaf sneered and stood up and looked behind him. The sea was rough and the sky was covered with dark clouds, as if a spring rain was brewing. The island of Ireland gradually became blurred in the distant fog. Olaf remembered that he and his uncle had become the epic heroes in the Heir family. Suddenly, there was a surge of spirit in his heart. He looked at the sky and said, Ireland may be the future. The waves are also rough, lightning and thunder. But what role can we play in it? Chapter 103, The Embryonic Development of Light Industry. Hagrid and Olaf led the fleet to leave Wenland and did not affect anyone in growth. The Vikings of Heart City led the slaves to reclaim the land and plant crops since March. They were busy until mid-April when the weather became completely warmer. Before completing this year's spring plow in Yote's goal of arable land was barely achieved. He rode a horse every day to patrol the village strongholds, observing the emergence of seedlings in the fields as the fertile land in Wenland is close to the black soil in the northeast, and the weeds and straws in the fields were burnt during the autumn harvest last year. At present, all the land in Wenland has no land to rest and restore its fertility, which is generally adopted in the west. Wenland in the rotation mode does not have to follow it yet. After the end of spring plowing, the construction of the third phase of Herat City began construction. At the same time, dozens of Viking longboats newly built by the Vikings fell into the sea to fish. Everyone was busy every day and improved bit by bit. To the city of Herat, in addition to planting potatoes, sweet potatoes and various vegetables, the two Addings under Olaf's leadership also tried to plant pumpkins, corn, and beans, the three sisters of the Indians, as well as European ornamental plants. Vegetable tomato. Olaf feels that if the three sisters and tomatoes are successfully planted this year, Vinland's planting industry model will continue to be changed next year. After all, cornmeal and pumpkin contain sugar, starch, and taste very good. Although Olaf does not like to eat it, it is a vegetable. Protein nutrition is necessary for the human body. To some extent, it can replace meat, which is definitely needed by Vinland food. Tomatoes, not to mention, Olaf also cultivated tomatoes just to satisfy his desire. The next step is to dip deep-fried potatoes with tomato sauce to enrich the catering culture of the backward Wenland people. After the end of spring plowing, Olaf applied to Heir for an exploratory experiment in the handicraft industry. Heir knew that his second son would never be aimless, so he transferred most of the Viking craftsmen who were proficient in various skills and handed them over to Commander Olaf. The rest were only construction craftsmen who were still leading the slaves to expand the city of Grut. Olaf asked more than 40 craftsmen and divided them into groups. Among them, carpenters, stonemasons and cobblers were the most, more than half of them. 3 were blacksmiths, 5 were shoemakers, 6 were potters, and 1 was a pen maker. 4 professional shipbuilders. Among these people, only 4 shipbuilders, 5 carpenters, and 3 cobblers are Icelanders, and the rest are all white slaves from Ireland and Scotland. These craftsmen are very happy to follow Master Olaf to do things, because they have heard of Master Olaf's miraculousness from various sources, especially the 12 Icelanders, all of whom were from the village of Herut, the White Hazel Forest. Villagers, according to their distant relatives, Olaf also calls them cousins or uncles. After Olaf knew that Herat City had unified Vinland, there would basically be no crisis in the island, and he could also develop and operate in a safe manner. After satisfying the intake of daily necessities such as food rations, it is necessary to improve the light industry and promote the products of daily life such as clothing, food, housing and transportation to achieve self-sufficiency. Wenland wood can be seen everywhere, so the production of wood products is the easiest and most convenient. This is the material that carpenters need to use. The pen maker can use feathers and various plant or powder gravel and other processed feathers to dip pen and ink. Masons can use stone to process small furniture and objects, such as rolling pins, stone mortars, etc. The raw materials can be mined on Razor Hill without having to travel far. Leather materials needed by cobblers and shoemakers are almost inexhaustible on Vinland Island. There is no need to worry about the shortage of materials to make leather clothes and shoes. Just consider the problem of insufficient manpower. The only troubles are potters, boat builders and blacksmiths at present. Wenland does not have iron mines, coal mines, and many tools, and potters and blacksmiths are basically useless at the same time. Due to the primitive limitations of tools and technology, shipbuilders cannot build large ships. Small primitive Viking longships are currently sufficient, and shipbuilding cannot be built in Hadriberg. So Olaf decided to let these craftsmen switch jobs temporarily to become carpenters and stonemasons. It has been almost 9 years since the Icelandic colonists came to Vinland. However, due to the small population, the felled timber is not obvious. However, with the construction of the city of Heir and the fishing of the Viking longship in the past 2 years for construction, the wood consumption of the southeast peninsula is very serious. Heir has ordered that if the wood is used, the ship will go to the hinterland of Vinland to cut down, so as not to make the southeast peninsula deserted. Olaf's purpose of convening craftsmen is to develop light industry in Wenland, and to make up for the second shortcoming of Wenland Island's social model. After making up for the shortcomings of grain after more than 3 hours of discussion, Olaf's opponents had a clear understanding of the technical characteristics of the 44 craftsmen, so he asked the 44 craftsmen to bring the slaves in the house, and Olaf also brought by the Viking boy and slave boy from Aden. A group of hundreds of people came to Hadriberg in the north of the city of Heir. Since the completion of the construction of the city of Groth, there has been no life in Hadriberg. At first, it could be used as a warehouse. Later, with the completion of Hadriberg, a large amount of materials and armaments in the city were stored in Hadriberg. In the warehouse, Hadriberg lost even the role of the warehouse, and is currently idle. Olaf is very satisfied with the area and spatial pattern of Hadriberg. He brought his craftsmen, teenagers, and slaves to him and wanted to build Vinland's first factory in Hadriberg. Olaf made more than 80 white and aboriginal teenagers become craftsmen apprentices, followed their respective masters to learn skills, and then assigned the halls of Hagberg to the craftsmen as production workshops, and the original warehouses were used as raw materials warehouses. After all the arrangements were in place, Olaf convened a meeting in the chamber, first announced that Hadriberg was renamed Olaf Factory, and explained that he would provide you with wood, leather, stone and other raw materials, and hire everyone to produce for the city of Harut handmade products. The remuneration is dried fish food and silver coins. In order to mobilize everyone's enthusiasm, Olaf paid a considerable amount. Compared with the work in other positions, these craftsmen are happy to be part of the Olaf factory, both in terms of inner feelings and compensation. Master Olaf, don't worry, we must follow your arrangements. Yes, we must work hard. Master, my old Hanem is a well-known shoemaker in Northern Ireland. How many landlords have asked me to make shoes? Don't worry, I will use the strength of milking to make shoes that satisfy you, young master. Listening to noisy loyalty of the craftsman, you read www.uucan'tchew.com. Olaf did not speak, but nodded with a smile, seeing how his expression looks like a 12-year-old boy. He is clearly a calm and sophisticated as an adult. His demeanor combined with his tall body and deliberately dressed mature clothes and hairstyles, in the eyes of the craftsmen and apprentices, the young master and the paddlehead Olaf are 16 or 17-year-old quasi-adults. Olaf's temperament and demeanor always make people ignore his age, which is what Olaf deliberately did. After all, it is self-evident whether a 12-year-old child or a nearly adult boy is more convincing. If he wants to do something independently, he must convince others to make himself look older, and being mature is the most basic operation. After all the craftsmen showed their loyalty, Olaf gave a light cough and pointed to old Gelder, who is also an Icelandic and has the closest relationship with his family. This is an old man in his 50s, short but burly, with skin that is a little yellow in the wind and sun all the year round. The red nose and the scent of alcohol from time to time burps prove that he is a drinker. According to the relatives, the old Geld can be regarded as Olaf's distant cousin, but they don't care about it. Relatives, after all, it is not uncommon for Icelanders to have distant relatives. Old Gelder is proficient in masons, carpenters and shipbuilding skills. He is the workshop director of the factory and is responsible for managing everyone's production and coordination issues. Waiting for Olaf to finish the appointment, and not waiting for old Geld to thank him, Olaf continued, tomorrow, the first batch of raw materials will enter the factory. Please familiarize yourself with it as soon as possible and lead the apprentices to produce simple production tools. I will wait until next week. We will issue production standards for everyone. Friends who do not meet the standards will be fined a certain salary, and the top 3 who complete the task will be rewarded twice. Chapter 104, Champlain and number 039, Goodwill. With the establishment of the Olaf factory, Heir ordered the people to send the first batch of supplies to the factory warehouse. There were a dozen large and small trees cut down, as well as various stones of different shapes and sizes, reindeer skins and sea lions, walrus skin and so on. Then the Olaf factory began to operate. Tanners and shoemakers select various parts of the leather, and then tan, cut, and manufacture them. Leather clothes are generally softer reindeer skins and seal skins, and leather shoes are made of walrus skins and old deer and sea lion skins, which are cut and sewn after hair removal. The sole of the single shoe is folded in 5 layers, and 1 layer is used for the upper. If it is a boot, add a layer of soft leather inside the smooth leather. The tools used by cobblers and shoemakers to make clothes and shoes are knives and scissors. These are the tools they carry with them. However, because they cannot purchase needles and threads, they temporarily replace the thread with cut soft leather edges, which are made of ground wolf fangs. Instead of long needles for sewing, carpenters make wooden pots, wooden combs, wooden plates, wooden bowls, knives and forks and other tools. Sometimes they also make wooden handle stone hammers and wooden handle stone hoes with a stonemason. There are also many craftsmen using vines to weave containers and baskets. Olaf inspected the finished product and was very satisfied. He felt that after meeting the living needs of more than 10,000 people in Vinland, the factory's products could be sold to the colonists of New England and New France and the Indians on the American continent tribe. These 3 forces all lack this kind of daily necessities for various reasons. If they are manufactured and sold, they will surely be rewarded with a lot of money. After the factory was put into operation, Olaf called Old Gelder and 6 potters, took them up the eastern of Razor Hill, pointed to the hillside below their feet and the large and small hills in the distance, and said, "You start from today. Just look for clay that can make pottery. Vinland's geology and area must contain a lot of clay. Pottery is our future development direction." The 7 hurriedly agreed, and then hurriedly left the city of Grove with their weapons to search for clay. Although Olaf doesn't know much about firing pottery and porcelain, he also knows that clay is necessary for firing these 2 items. In the strict sense, clay is not considered to be clay. It is the crystallization of mineral weathering, so it will become after high temperature firing. It's strong and doesn't crack like dirt. Olaf's impression of clay is wide and light white rocks such as mica, kaolinite, and asbestos. Of course, there are also other colors. Anyway, they contain calcium, aluminum, magnesium and other substances. Vinland definitely has similar mines. The only difference is that the content is high and low. Once you find it, you can make pottery. If you wait for heavenly creations to get, you can even make porcelain after thorough research. If Vinland can make it porcelain that only the Chinese dynasty can produce, even ordinary white porcelain and coarse porcelain, is enough to become a powerful country for the rich. Olaf was thinking about making pottery and porcelain in the factory. Suddenly a yellow-skinned Viking soldier in his 30s walked in and said, "Master Olaf. General, please come over." Olaf woke up suddenly, then got up and went to ride his white horse in the yard. You can actually know the identity of a person by hearing the address in Vinland. Only the Vikings would call Hader a general, while other slaves would call the lord of the city or the lord of the gods. Olaf followed the yellow-skinned Viking soldier out of the factory and returned to the council gate in the city of Grove. Viking soldiers dismounted and said in blunt Icelandic, "Master Olaf. The general is waiting in the chamber, please come in." Olaf nodded, then dismounted and handed the reins to the soldiers, then walked into the council government, went up to the 2nd floor and pushed the door into the council chamber. In the middle of the conference hall, there is a large square table and a dozen sofas. Hader sits in the east, as well as Jot, Hudik, Hoskild, Kadir and Heine. They are talking and seeing Olaf opened the door and pointed at the letter on the desk. Jot said, "Look, Mr. Champlain's letter." Olaf walked over and took a look, and found that Champlain was written in Latin, with a humble and polite tone. The request to establish an alliance with Vinland was very obvious. This was a world away from last year's changes. He couldn't help but feel a little strange. He said, "Why did Champlain suddenly change his attitude?" Hoskard sneered and said, "Francis just now came with a French priest. They were sent by Champlain to deliver the letter. Hader sent them to dinner before he could not express his opinion. Hader asked us to come. Talk about how to deal with it, uncle. What are your opinions?" Olaf nodded and asked, "Francis said just now that Quebec and the other 2 strongholds almost starved to death this winter. After the beginning of spring, the English still targeted them. This caused the famine in New France to become more and more serious. I think Champlain failed to reach the English. I agree, so I can only turn to pray for us to lend a helping hand." Hoskar's German tone was erratic, and he said sarcastically, "So I agree with Kadir and Hudik. We all refuse to help the French, Uncle Nate and Heine. Do you want to help the French?" Olaf looked at Heine. Yufei nodded, and Heine, with his beautifully trimmed beard on his lips, touched his beard and said, "I don't think the British are a good neighbor. Now if we can give New France favors, we will pull them into our camp completely." Dealing with New England will also be very worry-free. Olaf fell into deep thought when he heard the words. Hader looked at his most proud second son, and asked softly, Olaf, what do you think? Olaf said a year ago www.wooksiaspit.com. The best situation in North America is to maintain a three-legged position, but now the weakest New France extends an olive branch to the current stronger Wenland. If Wenland catches it, New England will feel nervous and may turn to target Vinland, which is not a good thing, but if Vinland doesn't help Champlain, it's not in Vinland's interest. It will also allow New England to drive away the French and become a confrontation between Vinland and New England. The two evils are the lesser one. Olaf felt that instead of letting New England eliminate the weak New France and drive Champlain away, it would be better to draw New France to his own hands and be a friend. Although this would offend New England, it would be able to curb it. New England's expansion ambitions, long-term considerations, are more conducive to Wenland's stable development. I suggest helping Champlain. Olaf raised his head and said firmly, with Vinland's current strength, if you don't care about losses, you can actually sweep New France and New England, but losing these two neighbors will not benefit Vinland in the slightest, because Vinland is still in its infancy and has no strength to advance to the mainland. Expansion, let alone fall into the quagmire of war with mainland indigenous people. What's more, the French and the British will not be willing to lose. In the future, Wenland will fight with two evil wolves again, which is definitely not a good thing. So keeping New France, but giving him and New England to compete with each other can consume the natives on the mainland, but also allow them to consume each other, giving Vinland time and space for development. At the same time, Vinland can also gain a certain degree of initiative through exchanges and transactions with the two colonies, and even establish exchanges with the countries behind them through the colonies, allowing the French and British to assist the French and British in the future when they explore Iceland and other European locations. Effect. Chapter 105, 8 Quebec City. Olaf's attitude became the last straw that overwhelmed the camel. Hader decided to help New France, and then met Francis in Quebec's messenger pastor again. Francis walked in with an elderly priest in a leather cloak, first greeted Hader, and then said, "Thank you for your hospitality. I am very satisfied with the food and growth." Hader smiled and invited the two to sit down, and then said, "We all understand the kindness of Governor General Champlain. Now I want to ask Francis, you and this Father Jessison, is the situation in New France really difficult?" Father Jessison can speak English, French and Danish, so Hader speaks English when communicating with him. The old priest can fully understand him, but he still looks at Francis. He is just a messenger, and his status and rights are far inferior to Francis, so whether the answer depends on Francis's attitude. Francis knew that to cooperate with Wenland must be true and sincere, so he didn't intend to hide it. He spread his hands and said, "I'm in Gaspé, where it is better, but Quebec is indeed about to collapse. Last month, 5 sick contract slaves were starved to death. Mr. Champlain asked me to help Wenland. He formed an alliance with New France, and then asked the Lord Hader to extend a helping hand. In order to show his sincerity, he is willing to send the Red Bay Basque whaling site and affiliated land on the north shore to Vinland." Hader laughed. Although he knew that Champlain would give Vinland benefits in order to win him over, he hadn't thought that Champlain would give him a stronghold before. This made Hader more and more aware of Champlain's difficult situation. He couldn't help but snorted, "Champlain, you haven't seen your situation and the situation in North America clearly. If this sentence makes Olaf say that it is you ignored me last year, and this year I will make you unable to climb high." Although Hader had a bit of contempt for Champlain's short-sightedness in his heart, he didn't show up on the surface. Instead, he laughed and said, "Since Governor Champlain is so sincere, I am very moved, and for the sake of your friendship with Bourbon, I decided to form an alliance with Governor Champlain and provide you with enough supplies." Franciscan had a bright face at the time. As a nobleman, he values face and honor as much as the Chinese, and his affection for Hader has increased a little. And then he brought Father Jessison along with his chest and thanked him. "How much food do you need?" Hader asked before Francis spoke. Father Jessison raised his eyes and said, "We need 3,000 pounds of flour and salt, butter, meat, etc." Hader laughed and agreed. Olaf suddenly kicked him quietly, and then pulled his father's clothes corners. Hader raised his brow, then coughed slightly, turned his head to look at Olaf, and asked, "Olaf, yacht, do you know the amount of food in our city? Is it enough to support friends in New France?" Francis and Father Jessison are farther apart, so they can't see Olaf's small movements, but Yacht, Heine and others can see clearly. Yacht was not quick to understand what Olaf meant, but knew that he must have an idea, so he stopped answering. Olaf turned sideways and said, "Father, we didn't have much food after the autumn harvest last year. There's not much left, and tens of thousands of us have to eat every day." Hader and others were taken aback when Olaf said what he said. They all knew that last year was a bumper harvest. Even after the winter, hunting and fishing are continuing after the beginning of the spring. Now the military fort in Hader Fort. There are still a lot of food, dried fish, meat, etc., and it is absolutely not a problem to allocate some to Champlain. But Olaf's words made them all lost in thought. They felt that the child would not take the initiative to speak easily. If he said so, there must be other intentions. After Olaf finished speaking, the scene cooled down. Francis and Jessan both blushed, feeling that they made Hader embarrass them. "Your Excellency Hader, if you embarrass you, we can still ask for less." Father Jessan's voice became weaker and weaker. As a respected priest, people have been fighting for him for decades. It is the first time to send money to ask for food, which makes him less and less confident. Olaf blinked at Ute. Ute also got up to complain to Hader, telling how much hard work and effort he had put in to satisfy the young and old in the city, and emphasized that as long as Francis takes away the food, there will be people hungry in the city. Haderman knew that Olaf and Ute lied, but they couldn't explain it. Instead, he understood Olaf's meaning, so he frowned and looked at Francis, who was ashamed, slapped him fiercely on the table, making a loud noise, and then said, "Don't say anything. Do you have the heart to watch Champlain's neighbors in New France starve to death? Besides, Brother Bourbon has come in person. I must help them. Just follow the number given by Father Jessan. You will prepare it for me right away. After the big deal, we will eat less. We must not make our French brothers hungry." Hader waved his big hand, and spoke out the righteous and awe-inspiring words of compassion without blinking, which moved both Francis and Jessan. "May God bless you, Lord Hader, you are really a good man." "Brother Hader, I must remember your help to us, for Champlain, Francis and others, they think that Hader led an army to conquer the indigenous people last year. The massive increase in the slave population must make it difficult to solve their food problems. Therefore, whether they can bring back food and how much food they can bring back, no confidence. After all, the French did not expect that the city of Grote has a sufficient number of hunters, fishermen, and agricultural personnel, let alone mobilizing all people, including the indigenous people, to vigorously develop agriculture, fisheries, and hunting. New France and New England treat natives and develop colonies differently, which creates an imbalance in the power of the two colonies. Similarly, New France and New England and Vinland have different development models, components, leadership cores, and even developmental thinking. Therefore, the two cannot think of the basis of Vinland at all, and they feel that Hader can lead the Icelanders to unify Vinland. Shock. In the future joint research project of the Vinland colonial culture of the University of Oxford and Cambridge, hundreds of thousands of words will be used to describe the same North American colony. www.wooksiaspit.com. Why Vinland can quickly gain a foothold and bring New France and New England, New Netherlands, etc. are far behind. Naturally, there are Nordic dragons and lion riders in the text, and the great contribution of His Highness Olaf Hadarsson is spared. But apart from His Highness Olaf, there are actually Vinland's environmental location, resources, and unique resources. The Turks are inferior in temperament to the sturdy and fierce soft environment of the mainland natives, which is a coincidence and necessity on the whole, according to the evaluation of Karl Marx, the mentor of the proletariat. Hundreds of years later, the successful colonization of Hader, Olaf and his son in Vinland and North America was due to various reasons, but the fundamentals, it is similar to Manchuria, which is rapidly expanding its population and land based on tens of thousands of people in the Far East. It is a product of the times. They have the peculiarities and cohesion unique to that era, and later generations. Even other rulers of the period cannot imitate and learn. If Hader and his sons did not colonize and squeeze the natives in the Americas, if they were not the first bourgeois and feudal monarchs in the world who led the proletariat who lost their wealth in Europe to the Americas to create their homes with their diligent hands, I might be against Kazakhstan. Dal and Olaf have respect, but thinking that apart from promoting a small number of natives to become citizens called Vikings, most of the natives' enslavement and oppression are almost the same as other colonists, I can't respect them anymore, to put it bluntly. Hader is a traditional feudal lord and military strategist, and Olaf seems to have some universal values, but it is limited to the people he ruled. Chapter 106, Unpredictable. In the end, under Hader's opposition, Francis and Jessan quickly bid farewell with gratitude to him and guilt to the people of Harrod village, and then took a boat of flour, dried fish, dried meat, and animal fat. After the food left the newly built simple pier at the mouth of the Muskox River, and then went west along the St. Lawrence River, they were going to send the food directly to Quebec City on the north bank of the midstream. Hungry and sick before dawn the next day, Francis' ship arrived at the port of Quebec City, and the soldiers who had been hungry so weak that their legs and feet and Francis's men carried food together, and then cooked a large pot of fish and flour porridge, knowing Quebec City. 83 of the people were full, and their faces were filled with contentment again. I miss the feeling of being full. In the governor mansion, Champlain put down the bowl in his hand, patted his stomach, and then looked at Francis and Jessamine who were sitting in front of him. Our merchant ships don't carry much food, but they are sufficient for a period of time. I originally insisted on it. I thought that the first ships would arrive in a few days, but I didn't expect the British to support the Iroquois to attack the Hurons. In the camp, we lost the support of the Hurons. In fact, I have to insist on not preparing to negotiate with the British to temporarily evacuate. Fortunately, your batch of food came in time. Champlain was originally an explorer and didn't understand the particularities of officials and nobles, so he was more rude than Francis. He glanced at his lover who had just finished eating meat porridge, and then Ali smiled slightly, took the tableware and left. Actually, I don't have much hope for your alliance with Vinland and requesting support for us, but it seems that you have persuaded each other's leaders, Francis and Jessamine, that you two have contributed to the new France in my heart. I will repay you. Champlain got up and bowed solemnly to the two of them to thank them before asking for details. When he learned that Hayter was out against the crowd, he would rather let the slaves of Groat go hungry than save food for himself. Champlain was also slightly moved. He knew that Vinland would not have enough food, but he didn't expect it. Feeling so nervous, thinking that they had just passed the severe winter, and the food consumption was very serious, Champlain understood very well, and at the same time exclaimed, I didn't expect Hayter to be such an upright and kind person. No wonder his subordinates love him so much. To fight for him and conquer the whole Vinland, I must meet him in person if I have the opportunity. Yes. Hayter is a straightforward, brave and kind person. We can establish an ally with him, so we don't have to worry about a cunning Englishman in the future. Francis did not hesitate to praise Hayter and said in agreement, the governor, Lord Hayter has shown his sincerity and determination. I don't know how we will respond to him. Jessamine asked, would you like to tell the New Englanders about our alliance with Vinland? Maybe they will be afraid of Vinland. Strong and maintain a harmonious relationship with us. The English are not ignorant people who can be intimidated. Even if they know that we are allied with Vinland, unless they suffer hardship or see that Vinland is willing to start a war for us, they will continue to deal with us. Jean Poulin shook his head lightly and said that. Champlain raised his eyebrows suddenly and said, I think we can invite Hayter City Lord to sign the covenant and be willing to help Vinland enter the hinterland of the mainland. This is our sincerity. Then after the signing of the covenant, we invited their soldiers to explore the North American continent with us. We can use Vinland's powerful forces to defeat the Iroquois tribes, so that we can suppress the natives who oppose us and deter the English. After all, now there are English people behind the Iroquois League. Okay, Father Jessamine's expression changed, and he said with a smile, Your Excellency is worthy of being a person whom the Prime Minister respects. I can't think of this way, Francis said solemnly. My lord, do you want to use Hayter and the others? It cannot be said that it is a use. Champlain glanced at Francis, who was a little emotional, and chuckled lightly. You are still young, and you don't understand that interpersonal interaction is to help each other. We help Vinland enter the hinterland, so that they can grasp the map and the distribution of indigenous people, and have a chance. It's a win-win thing to develop the continent with us, and then they work with us to defeat the Iroquois who threaten the land that everyone wants to develop together. Isn't it a matter of our own? This is beneficial and harmless to us. I hope you can understand that if there is no benefit, Vinland will not help us free of charge. Francis is not a stunt boy who does not understand politics, but his qualities make him more willing to be a gentleman. After lowering his head and thinking, he said, You are right, Governor, I take it for granted. Soon Champlain wrote a letter, and then looked at Francis and asked, Who'll deliver the letter? And invite His Excellency Hayter to lead the soldiers. Francis took a breath and said, I'll go. After finishing the result letter, Francis turned and left the governor mansion, preparing to return to Vinland by boat. After a while, Jessamine saw that Champlain's face was not good, and said in a low voice, Champlain, you don't have to be angry. I don't think Francis intentionally offended him. After all, he is still young, and he will be moved when he meets Hayter who treats him well. Champlain snorted coldly and asked, "What do you think of Hader? Speaking and doing things are very straightforward, sincere, tall and strong. He looks like a strong man. I think a good relationship with him will be very beneficial to us," Jessan said while thinking. To be honest, he does have leadership in him. The charm of people. According to the information I inquired about in Wenland, he was originally the leader of Iceland, so he was a good person in both methods and temperament. Bourbon had some friendship with him and it was normal. I have no time to care about Bourbon's personal relationships. I just worry that if Francis falls to Hader in the future, I, the governor of New France, will have no rights, Champlain said, looking at Jessan, and whispered, "I will write to the Prime Minister in a few days, please bring him personally. I hope to change to a French officer who I can control instead of holding a family force that is disrespectful." "Noble officer, okay." The subordinates are happy to help. Jessan bowed to salute, then stood up and said Francis took the guards and left Quebec by boat, and went down the current eastward. In the afternoon, he reached the Vinland transit point, turned the bow of the boat into the Muskox River, and then went to the dock. After getting off the boat, Francis rode his horse straight to the north city of Herod. After half an hour, the sky gradually darkened, and Francis and Hader took off his cloak and sat on the sofa. On the opposite side were Hader, Hudic and Olaf. Upon learning Francis' intentions, Hader happily accepted the letter www.uxiaspit.com and read it for a while, then said, "I am very happy to conclude an alliance with Governor Champlain. He invited me to lead a team in early May." The soldiers went and waited until the covenant was signed to explore the territory of Quebec and further west. "I thought it was very good. What do you think?" Hudic and Olaf naturally had no objection, but Francis suddenly said anxiously, "Champlain actually wants to lead your soldiers to help him defeat the Iroquois tribe. I think we are friends, so I don't want to hide you. You can refuse if you don't want to." Hader laughed at the words, got up and hugged Francis deeply, and said, "Thank you, my brother. Can I call you Francis?" After getting Francis's approval, Hader said, "I don't think Champlain's ideas are offensive to me. He knows my strength very well, so it's normal to want to use me to clean up the enemy. If he doesn't have this mind, I believe the senior officials of France will not let him be the governor of New France. I don't care about this, I only care about you. I care about my friend's attitude towards me. Francis, I'm very touched if you can say this. Don't worry, I will help you disperse the indigenous people with my heart. In the future in the eastern part of the mainland, I also hope you, a ground snake who is familiar with the situation, to help me earn enough money to win a base area that I can use. The area of the whaling site is too small. I heard from the Beothuk people that it is not as large as 1/3 of the city of Herod. Don't worry, buddy." Francis' eyes blushed, thinking about the process of getting acquainted with Hader, and felt that Brother Hader has been taking care of him in many ways and never regarded himself as an enemy or an outsider. This made his heart surgeon, and he couldn't help holding Hader. The big hand said affectionately, "As long as Wenland needs it, I am duty-bound." Chapter 107, Covenant. That night, Hader drank with Francis in the castle until midnight, and then ordered Catelyn to place one of the most spacious rooms for Francis to rest. The next day, Hader, Hudic and others first led Francis to visit the city of Groot, and then invited him to drink. Icelanders treat their relatives and friends by inviting them to live in their own homes to eat and drink. This is the closest performance and the most solemn etiquette. After 2 consecutive days of drinking and drinking, Francis was a bit unbearable. He felt that he was drunk again before he sobered. He didn't control his speech while drunk. It seemed that too many things in work and life flowed out like being. Francis was in a daze. He had heard before that the Nordic drinkers were amazingly drunk and warm to friends. It was only these 2 days that he had really seen it. He was vaguely afraid of this kind of enthusiasm, but he liked it very much. After Francis drunk and dreamed of living in Hader Fort for 3 days, the time entered May. The temperature in Wenland in May has increased by a notch, and Olaf feels that it is almost 10 degrees this morning. Hader ordered 30 Vikings from Icelanders and 30 Vikings from white slaves. He also ordered 40 Vikings from white wolf warriors. 100 guards at 9 o'clock in the morning. Hader, Hudic and Olaf took the soldiers, sailors and Francis to bid farewell to their families, and left Groot with 60 matchlocks, plate armor, bows and arrows and other weapons and equipment. Since I went to Quebec to form an alliance this time, Hader brought Olaf to the world. Hader and the others boarded 3 larger Viking longships, and Francis boarded a small armed merchant ship he had brought, and then the 4 wooden ships slowly left the port. From the Gulf of St. Lawrence to the west, and simply docked on the island of Anticosti at the mouth of the sea. Francis explained to the three of Hader the Gaspi camp on the south bank that he operated. Hader vaguely saw the peninsula in the distance through the fog, and then praised Francis. This time, Francis proudly led Hader's ship to continue to flow up west until the river became narrower and narrower, and he saw the horizontal direction ahead. The ship on the big island in the middle of the river slowly slowed down. This is Orleans Island. You can see Quebec City from the north and south rivers. The boat with the flag of the Kingdom of France moved slowly in the river. Francis stood on the deck and pointed to the island in front of him and said loudly. Hader did not speak, but Hudic murmured, "Orleans is a province of France." The place names of New France are similar to those of France. By naming the North American colonies, it can be seen that the French and the British lack knowledge and imagination force. Olaf had no intention of mocking the French's ability to name names. He just licked his lips and suddenly remembered the Orleans grilled wings that he loved in his previous life. But that kind of delicacy will only appear after hundreds of years, and now it can only be in his heart. Soon the ship sailed from the south of Orleans Island, and all three of Hader saw a castle built with stones on the north side of the river bend in front. It seemed that the area was not large, but the architectural style it is indeed French style. Half an hour later, Hader, Hudic and Olaf met Champlain and his female companion in the Governor Mansion as a New France. Champlain is also very good at English and can speak some Danish, so there is no barrier to communication with Hader. The brightly painted Ellie leaning against Champlain saw Hader, who was strong, tall and masculine, trembled, and couldn't help but look at him more with the sparkling autumn waves. Hader didn't look squint, just smiled politely, and then looked at Champlain, who was only shoulder high in front of him. After the regular etiquette was over, both parties were seated, and then Champlain thanked Hader and marveled at Hader's height in his heart. Hader is not humble about his help to Champlain, but emphasizes that the relationship between New France and Vinland is not what it used to be, and mutual help is naturally a matter of course. Champlain heard Hader's overtones, so he also smiled. "Yes, we are friends. We have to write it clearly in the next alliance book. We are also obliged to help each other." Hader nodded, and then asked about the situation of New France and the story of Champlain's establishment of the colony. The two chatted for a long time, and it took a long time for the clerk who followed Champlain to bring the covenant that had been written. Jean Poulin looked at it and handed it to Hader. Hader sees that the above is a treaty written in Latin, which directly states that the two sides help each other, and that one party asks for help from the other party to provide animal money or even military assistance, etc., and the two parties also jointly implement the exploration of the new territory, and each enjoys new development. Half of the colony's equity. Hader passed it to Hudic and Olaf. The three of them felt that there was no problem, so Hader and Champlain picked up a quill and signed their names on it. After the two agreements were signed, the two parties each held one. Champlain and Hader shook hands and laughed. "I went upstream along the St. Lawrence River last year and saw many customs. This year I am going to explore the south, but there are some powerful savage tribes. I wonder if your excellency Hader dare to explore with us." Hader sneered, "My soldiers are not afraid of any savages. When shall we leave?" Champlain smiled from the bottom of his heart, and then said, "How about tomorrow?" "Yes." Hader smiled in his heart as he finished speaking. Olaf smiled at the bottom of his heart as they watched each of them have a ghost, because Francis said earlier that Champlain was going to use Hader and others to deal with the Iroquois League. So Hader and others were very clear about Champlain's thoughts, said to explore south, but to take the opportunity to guide Hader and others into the sphere of influence of the Iroquois, and then cause a war. In order to clear the suspicion of deliberately, Champlain also used aggressive methods in advance. UOUCan'tYou.com. However, his careful thoughts have been exposed in front of the three Hadders who have the intelligence. Hader also deliberately tried his best. He wanted to take the opportunity to see if the wild men on the mainland were as tough and difficult to deal with as Francis said. At the same time, he wanted to let his Viking soldiers show their might, deter Champlain, and let him accept it. Be careful not to think about it as for saying that they can't defeat the savages. Neither Hader nor Champlain have even thought about this. Their only worry is what to do with the turf. Champlain wanted the empty-gloved white wolf. He knew that the land he had laid was the closest to Quebec. Hader's power was in Vinland. Even if he helped him lay a large area, he still had to fall into the palm of Quebec City. Just give Vinland the marginal benefits. Champlain's thoughts can be guessed by Hader and Olaf, but they also consider it if it invades the Iroquois territory south. After Hader leads the Viking soldiers to leave, Champlain will inevitably reclaim the land and even move the Hurons to operate, but the small and weak New France cannot deter Aboriginals. If they want to defend this land, they will be counterattacked and harassed by the Iroquois, which will cause the two families to consume each other after it is consumed. Wenlin will send a large army to the future to easily seize a piece of fertile land. Hader was influenced by the various plot stories in Olaf's Harut family edited by Olaf and the political stories of the ancient kingdom of Saris, China, that Olaf told him, and now he has a fairly high level of political literacy. For Champlain, his conspiracy and tricks can be seen through with two eyes, and will be taken over and digested. What Hader is going to use is Yang Mao. Unlike Champlain, he only looks at his eyes. He is looking into the long-term future. Chapter 108, Adventure. On May 2, 1629, Champlain and Francis brought 50 French soldiers and 120 Huron warriors to gather in front of the Doge's palace. Hader and Olaf stood beside Champlain in leather armor. Not far away was Hudic in a uniform with 100 Viking soldiers behind them. Before leaving, Hader also asked Olaf. It seemed that he wanted to keep him in Quebec City. This trip was to go to war with the most fair Iroquois in the eastern part of the mainland. Hader was also a little worried about Olaf's safety. After all, the age is still too young. Olaf has grown taller and stronger in the past 2 years. His height has exceeded 5.5 feet, 167 cm, which is the average height of an adult in Iceland. Although he is a lot worse than Hader Olaf, he is also stronger than Hudic. Only half a head short, put it in 100 Viking soldiers can be regarded as medium. Olaf was confident in his strength and fighting skills, so he insisted on exploring the south together. Hader glanced at his son's body and the black hair on his lips, and stopped dissuading him. The two teams arrived on the south bank by boat, and then the two teams of soldiers marched southward, not far apart but distinctly apart. Because it was an expedition, neither team was riding a horse. They were all on foot. The marching speed was not fast. When the sun came out, early in the morning, the fog cleared them before they passed through the first woods. The geology of Quebec on both sides of the coast is close to that of Vinland. It is a land with a pristine look. There are tall maple trees, cedar trees, and pine trees everywhere. The uneven ground is covered with weeds and shrubs, and you can see some from time to time. The mud pits of different sizes make people have to detour. However, the center of Vinland's hinterland is a plateau mountain range, but Quebec's south is a vast plain. Hader bent down and stretched out his hand to grab the soil on the ground. Seeing that the soil is soft and black, he smiled and said, "This land is very fertile. Ah, it is much stronger than our southeast peninsula in Wenland. If we plant food here, I am afraid we can feed 100,000 people." Hudic's eyes flicked. He looked at Champlain dozens of steps away, and said in a deep voice, "Let's first touch the nearby situation and the strength of the Iroquois, and then we will find a way to occupy the land on the south bank." Hader nodded, then clapped his hands and got up, continuing to follow the troops forward. Olaf was catching up with the U.S. presidential election in his previous life. I didn't miss the red and blue maps of dozens of states, knowing that from Quebec all the way to the south is the future state of Maine in the United States. The northeastern region of Maine is the famous potato production base in the United States, and the supply base of Uncle My's French fries. Olaf believes that the land from Quebec to the south of Maine will be the granary of the future. This is definitely the granary of the United States. The mainland's first choice. In an era when productivity is low and natural and man-made calamities are extremely harmful, food is the most fundamental core competitiveness. An hour later, a primitive stone fortress appeared on the plain in front, and some flags painted with eagle and snake totems were inserted. It is said that the fortress is actually a low wall made of stones, and there is a taller one inside. Stonehouse, there is a fortress for the Iroquois. We don't have to provoke them. Let's go around first. Champlain walked to Hader and said, pointing to the fortress. Hader was about to speak when suddenly 20 or 30 arrows shot out from the fortress. Although most of them were unable to get close, 3 or 4 arrows fell into the two armies, scratching a French soldier and a Huron warrior. The Viking soldiers were all in plate armor, so even if they were shot, they were unscathed. Champlain yelled, "Enemy attack! Go back quickly." Hader stayed in Champlain and said, "Your Excellency, please see how strong my Viking army is." After speaking, he glanced at Hudic. Hudic instantly grasped the spirit, and then ordered the army to sprint. 40 warriors held spears and dressed in plate armor and charged forward. 60 musketeers held arquebus guns. Follow the front, ready to get close and shoot the lead at any time. After a while, the Viking regiment rushed to the front of the fort with a rain of arrows. Hudic ordered the warriors to surround and approach from both sides. 60 musketeers were exposed from the front. The musketeers aimed at the top of the fort and bowed their bows and shot arrows. The indigenous people of the window and the indigenous people of the window lit the fire rope. Boom! 60 muskets were fired in 3 batches. Except for the first batch that killed more than a dozen natives, the remaining 2 rounds only hit the stone wall and suppressed the natives. When the guns were fired, 40 samurai had already jumped into the castle, and stopped for a moment after the sound of gold and stone clashes and the sound of rushing. Then the spear warriors dragged out the corpses of more than 30 indigenous warriors who had been killed. Master, the enemies have been killed. A small team leader walked up to Hudic and said loudly, Hudic, as the trainer and commander of the Viking regiment, is almost close to Hader. He nodded, looked at the dumbfounded Champlain and Francis behind him, and sneered. Hader was not surprised by this result, and then said with a smile, Your Excellency Governor Champlain, what do you think of my army's combat effectiveness? Champlain quietly swallowed and spit, and said, It's amazing. It's no less than the Royal Legion of France. Hader glanced at Francis, who was looking at the Viking soldiers enviously, and continued to say to Champlain, I will destroy this savage stronghold. The next one will be handed over to your soldiers. I am very curious about the powerful French soldiers. Today just see it. Champlain also looked at Francis www.uxiaspit.com and coughed slightly. Captain Bourbon, you will also lead our soldiers from New France to lay a stronghold for the Lord Hader to see. Francis did not agree, his face changed, and he said anxiously, the soldiers of Winland shot. The Iroquois warriors will soon be recruited. Let's run away. Champlain secretly accused himself of being frightened by the Viking corps, and even forgot the speed of the Iroquois reinforcements, and hurriedly said, Before I led the army to explore the terrain, I also encountered Iroquois fortresses, and the battle started. Before taking the fortress, hundreds of Iroquois fighters came to support us. At that time, we were outnumbered and lost a lot of Huron warriors before we escaped. Your Excellency Hader, we only have more than 200 people. If we don't leave, we will be in trouble if we are entangled by the Iroquois army. Hader asked calmly, How many Iroquois tribes are around here, and how many people are there? Champlain said without hesitation, There are 3 tribes nearby, with a total population of between 1,700 and 2,000. A tribe of 1,700 people can dispatch up to 700 or 800 warriors. We don't have to run, we can fight behind the fortress. Hader believes that his Viking soldiers have rich experience in fighting against the natives, and they bring the Vikings with the most exquisite marksmanship and the best martial arts. The cooperation of French soldiers is enough to defeat the Iroquois army in one fell swoop. After Hader finished speaking, he arranged for Viking soldiers to approach the fort, and then the musketeers boarded the fort. Most of the spearmen stood in front of the low wall, and the rest stood behind the low wall. The fortress's terrain is relatively high. Occupying it in advance will give you a certain strategic advantage. Champlain doesn't want to accompany Hader crazy and risk death to fight the indigenous people. He even doubted his decision to lure Hader to explore together. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 109, Brave Iroquois. Champlain didn't think his 50 French soldiers and 120 Huron warriors plus the 100 soldiers Hader brought could withstand the 7, 8, or even thousands of Iroquois fighters. He watched him coldly. After the deployment of Dar's soldiers, he approached Francis and ordered him to lead the army to protect himself from a temporary evacuation. At this time, Champlain was ready to give up Hader, who was looking for death. After all, Champlain had fought with the Iroquois for many years. He felt that these indigenous people were not afraid of death, and no more than half of the regular army was absolutely unable to defeat them. He remembered the Iroquois. The legs that he had suffered from arrow injuries a few years ago seemed to fatally hurt again, which made his mood drop to a freezing point. Francis was attracted by Hader's confidence and Viking soldiers' execution. He was not obedient to Champlain's words. At this time, he raised his eyebrows and said, If the governor is afraid, please leave first. Now I want to fight side by side with City Lord Hader to expand the territory of New France. After speaking, Francis also sent 2 French guards to guard Champlain, and then he led the remaining 168 soldiers to on the northeast side of the fort near 200 steps. and ordered people to form a circle and wait for Iroquois. When Heir and Heudic saw Francis' arrangement, Olaf also guessed that Francis' intention was to antagonize each other with the Viking soldiers occupying the fortress, and then assist in covering the fortress. Francis chose the right distance and position. He won't let himself be at the forefront, and at the same time he can help Heir. It's worthy of being an officer from the French royal family. He must have received systematic military education. Heir gave a light praise, then looked to the southeast and shouted, "Guys, raise your attention. The Iroquois fighters are about to arrive." A group of men in leather jackets with white cloth straps on their heads rushed out from the woods in the southeast direction. Gushing like a tide, the Iroquois appeared and Champlain hurriedly took the escorts back north, but he didn't want to escape, so he stopped in front of the woods in the north and looked south. These indigenous people have the same skin and facial features as the East Asians, and they are stout. Most of them are armed with wooden sticks, stone hammers and other weapons. Some of them also carry bows and arrows, but a dozen or so of them are carrying spear blades behind their backs. With bows and arrows, it was obvious that iron weapons were the weapons they exchanged from the New Englanders through trade. Heir knows at a glance that there are 600 to 700 or even 700 to 800 people. They are divided into 3 camps, each with 4 or 5 latte leaders. These people yelled and spoke in comprehensible language. When they approached, they saw the dead body outside the fortress. They immediately slapped their weapons, and then shook them a few times before rushing towards the fortress under the leadership of the leader Heir, who had been waiting a long time ago, led Olaf to stand behind the stone wall in the middle of the fortress, watching the aboriginal people outside get closer and closer, and their hideous and terrifying faces became clearer and clearer. Heudic, standing behind the outer wall, fumbled and calculated the distance between the Iroquois and the castle. Until they were 150 steps closer, Heudic shouted with a big hand, "First row! Fire!" Because the fortress space was too narrow, the 60 musketeers couldn't stand at a time, so they were divided into 3 rows, and 20 people went up and opened fire at a time. The 20 musketeers in the first group were all the oldest and best marksmen Icelandic musketeers. They lit the match rope and fired bullets. Each shot hit 1 or 2 Iroquois fighters. The Iroquois had also fought against the French many times and had seen how powerful the arquebuses were, but they only saw French soldiers on the hillside in the distance holding their guns, and the soldiers in front of the fortress were all holding spears, which made them to the effect, "I didn't guess that there were musketeers hidden in the fortress." Nearly 30 Iroquois warriors who rushed to the forefront either had blood on their chests or moved their faces, and fell to the ground with gunshots. 3 of them were leaders-like figures. The momentary attrition did not make the Iroquois flinch. The fierce and militant Iroquois were much stronger and brave than the Beoducs. The death of their companions made them even more crazy. The leaders sang war hymns, and accompanied by roars and singing, the Iroquois stepped over the bodies of their companions and rushed forward at a faster speed. The leaders and the good hunters in the tribe took down their bows and arrows and shot an arrow toward the fortress. Now the distance has been compressed to less than 150 steps. According to the impression of the Iroquois, their bows and arrows are enough to threaten the safety of white people, but most of the arrows fell on the Viking soldiers wearing plate armor. Apart from clinking and scratching, they did not cause any damage. The leaders and hunters are not wetlands unseen Beoduc fools. They know this is white armor, because French soldiers have officers wearing plate armor, such as Francis. Knowing that bows and arrows made of animal teeth and branches cannot penetrate iron armor, the Iroquois dropped their bows and arrows, clenched the iron tools in their hands, and shouted, "Rush to the white people and take off their iron armor. Kill them in the gap." During the Iroquois charge, Francis was also calculating whether they had entered the range of 50 French soldiers, and arranged for nearly half of the more than 100 Huron warriors to shoot at the enemy. The musketeers in the fort took turns firing. The second and third rounds shot and killed more than 50 people. Although the predecessors were shot to death, the indigenous people still rushed forward. Although the muskets were terrible, they could not shake the Iroquois human offensive. After the third round of shooting was over, the 20 musketeers in the first round also filled their ammunition and continued to shoot. 10 minutes later, after paying the cost of 200 lives, the Iroquois rushed to the fort. Just as they were about to pounce on the Viking soldiers, Heudic gave an order and he and 40 Viking soldiers were at the same time. Take off the short spear hanging from the belt around his waist, and then accompanied by the muffled throat www.wuxiaspit.com, the short spear flew out, passing a stream of light in the air. Puff puff. More than 40 Iroquois warriors facing them were pierced through their chests and lower abdomen with 41 short spears. And then most of them died tragically on the spot. while a small number lay on the ground and howled in pain. One of the 3 skills of housekeeping passed down from generation to generation by the Icelandic Vikings is flying spear and flying axe. That is the skill that the ancestors learned when they robbed ships, and many Icelanders have not discarded this skill for many years under the personal training of the Icelandic captain and instructor. Everyone has mastered the flying spear skills. The 40 Vikings from the White Wolf Warriors' hands have also mastered the flying spear and flying axe skills, within 25 steps. It can be done with one spear through the chest, wherever it is pointed. Although it was partially affected by the wearing of plate armor, the 3-pound short spear in 20 moves was still an unstoppable and difficult to evade weapon in the hands of Viking soldiers. 40 Viking soldiers continuously removed the 4 short spears hanging from the waist belt and threw them out, killing and wounding more than 100 Iroquois in succession, causing most of the Iroquois who were about to rush to the fortress to be killed or injured. More than 800 Iroquois warriors had killed or injured more than 300 people before they even touched the Viking warriors. The remaining 500 people still did not step back, and were ready to swarm up in a roar, but neither the musketeers in the fort nor the French soldiers close to 170 or 80 steps away would hesitate and stop. The 20 bullets in the fort and the 50 bullets of the French soldiers turned into a life-threatening demon. Among the Roke's fighters, more than 40 people were killed in an instant before the gunfire disappeared. The Hurons, more than 50 feather arrows fell again, shooting more than a dozen Iroquois in an instant. This wave of blows caused the Iroquois to fall down in nearly 60 people again, and the continuous mass attrition finally completely destroyed the Iroquois' fighting consciousness. Chapter 110, How to Guard Against Terrible Vikings? The primitive and savage Iroquois have always been dominant in northeastern North America, and the surrounding tribes generally will not provoke the Iroquois alliance. Even the battle between the colonists of New France and the Iroquois often fell into the wind, but today the Iroquois kicked the iron plate when facing the Viking warriors. The continuous and precise musket attacks and flying spears, as well as the bows and arrows of the Hurons, killed and injured a third of the Iroquois, but at this time they still had a strong desire for revenge. Only rushing into the castle, dozens of people Viking soldiers will be swallowed and shredded by them in an instant. Even if the spearmen can kill 3 or 4 times as many enemies before they die, the Iroquois warriors with more than 500 people will surely pile up the Viking spearmen to death. But the collective attack by the French musketeers, Huron archers, and Viking musketeers killed more than 60 people in front of the fortress instantly, which caused a piece of land in front of the fortress to be emptied in an instant. By this time, the leader samurai who rushed to the front were all dead and wounded. The remaining more than 400 samurai also lost the courage and desire to attack after discovering that the team had been reduced by half. In the strange cry of, "I don't know which Iroquois warrior turned around and escaped first. If there is one, there will be a second one." More than 400 Iroquois warriors fled like an avalanche, and they fled faster and faster. The only courage left was also dissipated after someone fled first. The warriors who fled behind even lost their weapons. A few minutes later, Heir and Francis embraced warmly and laughed together. Haha. Although the Iroquois are brave and good at fighting and are not afraid of casualties, don't they let us defeat it. Heir clenched Francis's hand and said. Francis looked admired and said, "Thanks to brother Heir, how could we have had such a beautiful battle if it weren't for you? Lions never fear packs of wolves. We have matchlocks, plate armor, and are all highly qualified soldiers. Why should we be afraid of a bunch of wild men?" Heir, if nothing happened on the surface, was actually a bit afraid in his heart. He never thought that the Iroquois were so brave. If it were not for the support of Francis at the end, many of them would have died. Francis and the French soldiers and the Huron warrior were very happy. The Huron warrior saw that the Viking soldiers didn't mean to search for the spoils, so they swarmed over, groping for the teeth of beasts, colorful feathers and weapons on the 400 dead bodies. "We have killed half of the men in the 3 nearby tribes in one fell swoop. I think without us, the Hurons and other tribes will take the initiative to attack the Iroquois when they know about it. This land will soon fall. It's in our hands." This is the first time that Francis has won such a big victory in the battle with the Iroquois since he came to New France. He estimated that he would send the report back to Paris and he would have the opportunity to be transferred back to the country to serve as a legionary commander. Heir saw that Francis was very happy, so he said, "The large tracts of land on the south bank of the St. Lawrence River must be developed and planted with enough food to feed thousands of people. The next step is to drive the Iroquois away as soon as possible. And then stay here. A piece of land to establish a real fortress stronghold and guard our common land." Francis patted his chest to make sure and then the two sides were ready to return to Quebec. After walking north without 300 steps, I saw Champlain standing on the road waiting for everyone with surprise and admiration. Congratulations, Lord Hayter and Captain Bourbon. You worked together to defeat the Iroquois. This is the biggest victory since the establishment of New France. Champlain touched the beard on his upper lip, then smiled and said, I will appeal to the two of you, and ask your Royal Highness and the Cardinal and Prime Minister to honor them. Hayter and Francis both had a cold face, and they had a deeper understanding of Champlain's cheeky. Although Hayter despised Champlain who had escaped, they were not a group after all, so they just squeezed a stiff smile and said, Thank you, Your Excellency. Then, Francis frowned, and said coldly, I will apply for a transfer from New France, so you don't have to do it for me, Lord Governor. The smile on Champlain's face froze, and a flash of anger flashed in his eyes. But he suppressed it and said warmly, This time I underestimated the combat effectiveness of the soldiers of Lord Hayter. You must forgive me as a governor, Captain Bourbon. Think carefully. Without waiting for Francis to reply, Champlain looked at Hayter again and leaned forward. I apologize for my reckless and cowardly performance. I hope you can forgive my mistakes, Lord Hayter. Hayter remembered. Francis said that since Champlain came to New France, the battle with the Iroquois had always suffered a loss. He was even shot in the leg by an Iroquois, and he lived in the Huron tribe for half a year. Back in Quebec, he knew that Champlain's subconsciousness attached great importance to the Iroquois. It was not his fault that he did not think that 200 or so soldiers could beat the 800 or 900 Iroquois. Hayter relieved Champlain, and the group went back to Quebec City. After returning to Quebec City, Hayter, Hudic and Olaf all felt a little stagnant and depressed. This is because Champlain's distrust and non-support of himself and others and Francis planted a rift in the relationship. Although on the surface it seems normal, but I can't get close inside. Hayter and the others, after accepting Champlain's dinner banquet, left on the boat the next morning after the Vikings and Vinland left. Champlain wanted to talk to Francis and resolve the knot in his heart, but Francis also immediately proposed to withdraw. Gaspé, seeing Francis' face, Champlain knew he was still angry, so he didn't say much, and let Francis leave by boat. After Quebec City became quiet, Father Jessizan walked into his room and asked, What are you going to do? What do you do? Champlain asked. Jessizan knew very well that Champlain understood what he meant, but he didn't care. Instead, he explained, Captain Bourbon has been separated from you. On the contrary, his relationship with Wenlin is getting closer and closer. Although you and I are both early, I noticed it, but I didn't expect a battle to lose control of our relationships. If you want to stabilize the position of the governor, you must deal with it as soon as possible. Jessizan was the subordinate of Prime Minister Richelieu when he was the cardinal. Although the national power could not be used to support New France due to the European War, Richelieu still sent him to New France for missions and for coordinating the relationship with the merchant shipping company. Guarantee the interests of the church and Richelieu in the for business. Therefore, Jessizan and Champlain are actually a team with the same interests, and they will discuss matters large and small in the colony together. Champlain also knows what Jessizan said. He now regrets that he chose to retreat when Hayter insisted on fighting the Iroquois. He now thinks that although there are reasons for his lack of confidence in fighting, there is also the hope that he can use Iroquois. The Cree people consume or even defeat the Icelanders, so that the strongest Vinland in the North American colonies will be weakened, and only when New France and Vinland get along can they master a certain amount of initiative. But what he didn't expect was that Francis would be willing to fight alongside Hayter, and the Iroquois would be easily defeated. I made a mistake in this matter. Champlain rubbed his temples, and then sighed. People in New England have no good intentions towards Quebec, and our ally Vinland is too strong. I really feel that the situation in New France is it will be difficult to carry on. Maybe after 2 years, it will either cede the interests and land to New England, or become a vassal of Vinland. Francis is too ignorant. Maybe it's because of the difference between status and rights. Jessizan didn't worry about Champlain. He sighed in his heart after hearing this. Is Francis ignorant? The cooperation between him and Hayter can build commendable military merits, which you cannot give him, Lord Governor. If Captain Bourbon and Hayter unite to expand the territory on the mainland, even if they only get half of it, it will also expand the territory of New France and the Kingdom of France. This will definitely become the capital for his promotion. As for whether the land can be smashed holding and operating to make a profit, that is what the governor has to consider. How can Captain Bourbon take into account your feelings for his future, and the governor, Your performance is too fickle due to the troubles and gains, which may offend the Vikings of Wenland. If both New England and Vinland target New France, I think this is not a good thing. Quiet for a while. www.uxiaspit.com. Champlain suddenly got up and said, Francis' identity should not be trapped in a small New France. I should help him get promoted, and let him be transferred back to France to serve as commander of the army and go to the European war. His brilliance bloomed on his stage, don't you think? Jesse's eyes flashed when he heard the words, and the secret path was powerful. Now Denmark has gone, and France is preparing for the war, and it is likely to take action personally. Not to mention whether Francis will survive after returning to France and being involved in the all-European war, but that he has been transferred. It would be very beneficial to Champlain to change a new captain, and the power of the governor was also strengthened after Francis left. The governor-general takes care of the younger generation. This is a good virtue worthy of praise, Jesse's said with a smile, and agreed with Champlain's decision. Hey, Francis's problem is easy to solve. Champlain looked at the ceiling in confusion, and sighed, but I really can't help defending against that terrible Viking. The scene was completely cold. After knowing that Jesse's had left, Champlain collapsed and felt a deep weakness. After a long time, he finally said quietly, we can only ask the company to increase the amount of white slaves and introduce New England to contain the text land, but maybe it's useless. Hey, soon, in mid-May, the French ships transporting fur, grain, sugar and other colonial products between the New World and Paris, after docking in Quebec, left the New World with the fur and Father Jesse's, heading for Paris in the east. There was also a letter written by Governor Champlain in his arms. This is a letter asking for merit. Champlain even appropriately exaggerated Francis's military and other achievements. If we exclude some other factors, just look at this letter, he can already be regarded as Francis de Bourbon's career. Noble. Chapter 111, Smallpox. On May 1st, Heir, Olaf, Hadarsson and 100 people left Vinland for Quebec City, and returned to Port Road on the night of the 3rd in the evening. The leaders of the city had a dinner together in the restaurant on the first floor of Hatterborg. It was not only to celebrate Vinland's successful alliance with New France, and then to obtain land on the mainland, but also to celebrate the battle to defeat the Iroquois. This battle gave Heir, Hadarsson and Viking soldiers a clear understanding of the powerful savages on the mainland. The Iroquois were indeed braver, fierce than the Beoducs and the Kismas. Not afraid of death, but with the help of advanced weapons and high-quality soldiers, he can still win. With less. Hadarsson and Heir held a meeting before the banquet. After discussion, they conservatively estimated that if they want to defeat the team that defeated the Iroquois fighters with little or no loss, the number of Viking soldiers must reach the Iroquois. More than 1/3 of people. But if you can use terrain, traps, obstacles, etc. to prepare in advance, a quarter can also win. Moreover, the number of musketeers among these Viking soldiers must account for a 50%. Otherwise, there would be no strong enough long-range firepower to suppress and consume indigenous fighters, and fewer musketeers would make the Iroquois more than the number of Viking soldiers. The men approached and dissipated the phalanx of Viking soldiers at the same time. Because the Vikings wore plate armor and the indigenous people did not own iron, their bows, arrows, weapons, and traps were completely itchy to the Vikings, so the crushing situation will not change for the time being. Olaf proposed that when conquering the savages, he could carry a large number of oxen and carriages, and then use the ox carriage to form a line of defense during the battle. The musketeers shoot in the chariot and the spearmen defend behind the chariot. Simple castle. It would certainly not work if it was facing the European army with artillery and guns, but it would definitely be able to sling against a primitive and backward indigenous people. Hadarsson was the first to agree, and finally Heir decided on the future Viking legion's tactics against the Indians. A cocktail party ended in the middle of the night. Olaf drank a glass of beer for the first time at the banquet. He was worried that drinking would affect his body, so he never asked to drink it. He declined the invitation of relatives and friends, but this time he drank a glass. Later, he felt that although the current beer was not as good as the future, the basic taste was similar. After drinking a large glass of beer, Olaf fell asleep with many thoughts. After getting up the next day, Olaf was about to go to the factory when he suddenly saw Ut running in shock. Whereas Heir, Katrin went out early in the morning to lead women to sew clothes, so Olaf and Heir were the only ones at home. Dad is still sleeping. Maybe I drank too much last night. Oh. What are you sleeping? Yacht stumbled and cried, then quickly walked into Heir's room and dragged him up. This is the first time Olaf saw Yacht like this. Before asking questions, he heard him yelling in Heir, who was still a little confused. There is a smallpox in the city. Hater. It's smallpox, what? Smallpox? Hater suddenly turned pale and jumped up, grabbed Yacht's shoulder and asked, how many people? How long has it been? 3 people. They are Vikings from Ireland. The first child who became ill was their child. Later, the couple became ill. I have people sealed their home, Yacht said very quickly. Who did they have contact with the day before yesterday? They have to control it. Hater grabbed a leather jacket and walked out quickly. Olaf knows that this is an era of lack of medicine in medicine. A common disease and later generations may take away a person's life. Smallpox is almost extinct in later generations because of the popularization of vaccines, but in this era, the fatality rate is extremely high. Virus because Indians in Central and South America and North America have not been exposed to the virus on whites, they have been infected with smallpox, typhoid fever and other viruses, and the mortality rate is almost 100%. For more than 100 years, Central America and South America, tens of millions of Indians in the Americas died 70%, and the Indians in North America also died. Half Asia and Europe currently do not have a good treatment for smallpox. It is purely physical resistance. At present, the fatality rate of smallpox in Europeans is more than 1/3. For more than 20 years, there are more than 60 people in North America and the UK. The expedition team established a stronghold, but it was almost wiped out by the smallpox virus within 2 years. It can be seen that this contagious and terrible virus is a big bomb as long as it is not handled in time and improperly. There are now more than 10,000 people in the city of Herod, most of whom are Beataks, who are the least resistant to the smallpox virus. If the communication spreads, Vinland Island will become a purgatory on Earth. Olaf also knew the seriousness of this matter, so he followed his father and Yacht to several houses that had been blocked by Viking soldiers. The patient and his neighbors are all under our control. So far, the family whose smallpox has been identified has only contacted 4 neighbors, but these 4 neighbors have contacted 12 people who were locked up in the house. All of whose slaves were also arrested and locked up in the cave. Heine was holding the hilt of the sword at his waist with his right hand and was guarding in front. When he saw the 3 of Hater coming over, he stepped forward and said. Hater nodded and said in a deep voice, from today, don't live in the houses nearby. Everyone moves to the outer city to build houses, and the distance between houses should be large. Anyone who is sick should be reported in time and controlled in time, so as not to have another infection. Yacht and Heine hurriedly sent someone to convey the message, and then Yacht pointed to the dozens of long houses that were blocked and asked, what about these houses and the 30-odd people inside? Hater looked solemn, hesitated for a while, and finally frowned in pain and said, Lighthouse, it is good. In fact, Yacht and Heine have given up on the 3 people who are already ill and the 30 neighbors who may be ill. They are at great risk of infecting other people when they are alive, so that the entire city of Herod and even Wetlands, everyone is at risk of getting sick. The best way at present is to set a fire to all the sick and possibly sick as well as the houses with the virus. When everything is burned to ashes, the plague crisis is over. Hater's order, Yacht and Heine agreed without hesitation, and turned around to arrange for someone to execute it, but Olaf couldn't bear to watch his companion being killed. He stopped the 2, then whirled his brains and said, don't worry. I have a way. In the hopeful eyes of Hater, Heine, and Yacht. www.uxiaspit.com. Olaf was sweating profusely, and suddenly remembered a news he had heard in his previous life, that is to say, people who have been infected with smallpox or vaccinated against smallpox will never get smallpox for life. That is to say, antibodies will be formed if they are infected with smallpox virus if they die. Later generations will have vaccinia, but now they have nothing, let alone. It is said that there is no good treatment for smallpox in later generations. Olaf has no way to treat smallpox, but he knows that people who recover after being infected with smallpox have immune antibodies, so he said, our people who have had smallpox aren't afraid of smallpox? We'll never get a second time. It seems to be, Yacht said hesitantly. Heine and Hater thought for a while, and their eyes lit up at the same time. Heine said, you mean to let people who have suffered from smallpox not die to take care of the sick? Then there will be transmission to others. Olaf nodded and said, look for people with antibodies, that is, people who have had smallpox. The rest of the people who have not had it should stay away from here, away from people who have contact with smallpox patients. We will close this place and wait until 10 days later. Those who survived are lucky. Hater and Yacht glanced at each other. In fact, they didn't want to kill their fellow citizens, but they had to be cruel for the safety of tens of thousands of people in Wetland. Now Olaf gave a better plan, and they all chose to accept it. So, under the search of big and small leaders such as Jad and Heine, more than 700 of the 2,000 Vikings had smallpox, and among the more than 10,000 Beothuk slaves, 6,000 had suffered from smallpox. This data represents that Icelanders, Ireland, Scotland, etc. who were sick with them at the same time died by 1/3, and those who were sick with more than 6,400 Beothuks at the same time died. The second is even more. Chapter 112, Human Pox and Vaccinia. With the joint efforts of the big and small leaders, the city of Herat was quickly mobilized, and dozens of the most clever slaves were quickly selected, followed by 10 Vikings to replace the Viking soldiers to seal off the epidemic area, and then close contact with the patients. Provide food and so on. After more than 10 days, except for the men, women and children of the 3 patients died of illness, and 80% of their neighbors were infected with smallpox, and the remaining 20% were not infected because they had contracted smallpox but did not die. After waiting for another week, the man recovered and his neighbors also died. The man-made disaster of 33 people suffering from smallpox was resolved after the death of 17 people, but it also gave Heir, Heudic, Olaf and others a reminder that in a densely populated city like Rode, although sanitary management and cold climate restrictions prevent most diseases from spreading, smallpox and flu still have to be prevented. The establishment of epidemic prevention and control mechanisms and conventional defense methods have reached the point where they must be established and implemented as soon as possible, because this concerns the lives of 10,000 people on Wetland Island. In the European traditional sense, the plague is treated as a demon. There are also means of isolation, but they are not thorough, and there is no cure and prevention method. In many areas, people are completely left to fend for themselves, but Wetland is a place of legionized management, so Heirs can be implemented quickly without compromise. The matter was urgent, and there was no time for a meeting. Olaf handed over the advanced epidemic prevention system of later generations to Heir. Heir quickly understood it, and then sent someone to carry it out. The first is the prevention and control mechanism, that is, personal hygiene and collective hygiene should be upgraded again. For example, excrement should be distinguished from domestic garbage and sewage. Water can be drained into ditches. Toilet pits must be built next to each longhouse to avoid defecation visible. Wash your hands before and after meals. At least once a month, you have to take a bath. In order to save resources and make it easier for everyone, Heir plans to build a large bath in the city and use an earthen stove for heating. In addition to the mandatory hygiene issues, there is also the use of linen cloth to make masks. 3-layer linen masks must be sewn at home, and everyone must wear them in times of epidemics and diseases. If someone has a cough or fever, they must be isolated at home and wear a mask during isolation. When formulating the system, there must be a strict supervision and punishment mechanism. Anyone who reports that others do not abide by the epidemic prevention system will deprive the violator of the status of a free citizen after verification and use it as a slave. This epidemic prevention system can certainly be implemented in Wetland at present, but in the future, as Wetland's population increases, it will gradually relax. But Olaf felt that a few years would be enough, because he thought of a good solution once and for all, that is, a vaccine. Olaf had planted a vaccine in his previous life and knew it was Vaccinia. The virus was extracted from cows that had smallpox. This virus is not lethal. A small amount of implantation in the human body will make the body's immune system swallow and digest, and then form antibodies. The problem is that Olaf doesn't know how to extract it from cows, and he doesn't know what kind of disease the cow shows as cowpox. Therefore, we need to commission a full-time experiment with careful personnel. The method of experiment can be to contact sick cows and observe the reaction. After Olaf said this idea, Heir ordered a slave who had never had smallpox to be selected every day to feed the animals in the stables and cattle pens. According to Heir's vision, if symptoms of smallpox appear at any time, a sick cow or horse can be found. Then a small amount of concentrated water mucus is extracted from the sick horse and implanted in the human body, so that it can have a simple vaccine effect. Olaf didn't know if Heir's idea was correct, but he also thought of another very clever method of human pox vaccination invented by Chinese medicine before the invention of the Vaccinia vaccine. Olaf can't remember the specific details, but he knows that human pox is a traditional Chinese medicine. Patients suffering from smallpox, the chickenpox pus and scabs are dried and ground into powder, and then blown into the human nostrils. Using the fragile nasal mucosa and the capillaries absorb the virus, and then mild symptoms appear, which have a similar effect to vaccination. Olaf believes that finding cowpox and experimenting with a method of seeding is not something that can be found in 3 or 2 days or even 3 or 2 months, But human pox seeding can be used immediately because there is a ready-made vaccine in the quarantine area. Olaf once again pushed him to Elder Amy, his teacher in the church school in Iceland. He said that when Amy was preaching in Germany, he encountered a special method for preventing smallpox learned by Arab doctors. It was called the human pox seeding method. Hader didn't delve into it, or he didn't doubt his son's thoughts at all, so he regarded the human pox vaccination method as a treasure. He ordered the patient's chickenpox pus and scabs to be collected, dried and ground into powder. Wrapped in paper, 3 slaves were found for experimentation. Worried that the method of blowing would not be able to measure, Hader hired a few shoemakers and personally picked a bit of the acne powder into the nose of a slave with the pins they used to sew shoes, then flicked it and put the needle on the eye. The powder shook deep into the slave's nose. Hader personally tried it out, and Olaf, Hannah, Hudik, Yat, Hoskard, and several ingenious women and craftsmen watched. One of the 3 slaves flicked powder from a needle eye deep in the nose, the other had 2 needle eyes, and the last one was 3 needle eyes. Then the 3 slaves were imprisoned for observation. All 3 of them started to have fever the next day, but the time of onset was different. As time changed, all 3 of them showed some symptoms of smallpox. The slaves who had the 3 needle eye viruses were the most serious, and they had the same symptoms of smallpox. It was exactly the same, and then died in pain 8 days later. The other 2 had fevers, and then returned to normal after 1 day of fever. Both Hader and Olaf were pleasantly surprised. In order to test whether it was correct, Hader picked 3 needle-nosed human poxes in the noses of the 2 slaves. After waiting for 2 days, they found that they had no response. This was convinced. The human pox vaccination of the 2 slaves was considered a success. The success of human pox inoculation gave Hader and other leaders great confidence. Then Hader handed the needles and paper bags to several carefully selected women and craftsmen with ingenuity, and asked them to give the first batch of 200. The slaves were seeded. This batch of slaves are also selected slaves of all ages. www.wuxiaspit.com. This large-scale seeding experiment is carried out. If the effect is still acceptable, it means that the human pox vaccination method is indeed effective. Soon the first batch of slaves had seeded, and then all of them developed fever, but 17 people also developed chickenpox and other symptoms after the fever, and then gradually became severe. The remaining 183 people returned to normal on the 3rd day, and then Hader ordered them to contact the 17 people who had failed inoculation and had an outbreak of smallpox virus. As a result, none of the 183 people had a second infection. The success this time finally made Olaf relieved, and Hader and others were even more ecstatic. They felt that mastering the human pox vaccination method meant that they had overcome a terrible invisible of death in the past. As long as I got sick, I hoped not to become 1/3 of the dead, but now with the vaccinia method, basically everyone has the opportunity to be immunized against smallpox. With the promotion of the vaccinia method in Herat City in the future, smallpox will not harm Wenland's people. Perhaps in 5 years or 10 years, Wenland's population will usher in a period of rapid growth. Hader and Hagrid both had smallpox when they were young. Their elder brother and younger brother died of smallpox and other diseases. However, the 2 brothers had been in good physical condition since they were young, and both survived that year. Olaf has never suffered from smallpox, including many of his friends. For the sake of long-term health, he chose to become the 3rd batch of seedlings, and then after a flustered low-grade fever overnight, the next day he regained his physical strength and became alive again. Olaf, who had a gold medal to avoid death, looked very relaxed when he looked at the Vikings who lined up for seeding. He was no longer the anxiety before yesterday. He let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, overcoming the crisis of smallpox, I'm more confident in the future. Chapter 113, Whaling Point. After a month of slow production and life in the city of Groot, or even close to stagnation, all people in Groot who had no antibodies to smallpox had human pox seeding, although there were also more than 100 people who had smallpox outbreaks during this period, and then more than 80 people died. But the final result is that everyone who survived had antibodies against smallpox. On the 3rd day after the city of Groot returned to its fast-moving busy state, Hader remembered a Red Bay Basque whaling site on the opposite bank of Vinland Island, where he had belonged. The Red Bay Basque whaling point is the closest place to Vinland Island and the western mainland. This is a dumbbell-shaped bay. Because every whale slaughter will stain the bay red, it is named Red Bay, which was established by the French before. The stronghold is on the northeast shore of the bay. It was an unexplored virgin land before the English and Dutch entered North America, But 100 years ago the Basques in France found the most famous fishing ground near Vinland and started whaling and hunting. The phenomenon of catching cod to make dried fish for sale reached its peak half a century ago because fishermen come to Vinland fishery in spring. They will accumulate enough dried fish to return to Europe at the end of summer or even early autumn. In order to ensure their own lives and have a fixed place for fishing and drying fish, the Basques are in the north of Vinland. The exit of the Gulf of St. Lawrence established a stronghold, built houses, fortresses, and cultivated vegetable plots later, as explorers from England and France entered the east coast of North America to explore and search for beavers. The original whaling site became the territory of New France. Usually 2 guards and 20 or 30 fishermen were stationed to fish. The dried fish is also traded with a neighboring Cree, Abnaki, and Bedak. Since the governor of Champlain and Vinland's controller Heir signed an agreement last month, the Basque whaling site and ancillary land have belonged to Vinland. The fishermen and guards on the island, as well as some Hurons, both the Cree and Abnaki moved to Anticosti together, lost the owner's stronghold, and within a few days, it was occupied by the nearby indigenous people and moved in, and it was quickly messed up. But at noon that day, more than a dozen long Viking ships quickly entered the Red Bay and docked on a simple dock on the southern sea. The indigenous people didn't recognize these boats, so they all ran out to watch. A dozen of the boats were filled with 30 Vikings and 300 Bedak slaves. The Vikings were wearing leather armor and holding matchlocks. The slaves were holding a spear in hand and wearing a breastplate made of wooden blocks and leather strips. This is a simple protective gear invented by Hudic to protect the slaves. If he encounters wild beasts and indigenous people, the wooden armor can also play a certain protective role. Seeing that the white people came with the Bedaks, the indigenous people who occupied the whaling site were shocked. They now know that Vinland is ruled by the whites. Seeing that more than 300 people came with weapons, frightened, they all fled with their families in groups. It was Hudic who led the team to accept the whaling spot this time. He led 30 elite Viking soldiers and 300 slaves and warriors. This is Vinland's first important work after the end of the epidemic prevention work and the seed setting. If smallpox were not present, it stands to reason that the whaling site would have been received long ago. Now that normal production has resumed in Groot, I think of the whaling site on the North Shore. In the strategic plan made by Heir, Hudic and Olaf, Vinland will use the whaling site as a base. Slowly expand the territory to attack the mainland in order to prevent the indigenous people near the whaling site from disobeying the discipline. After the French left, Hudic personally led more than 300 people to the stronghold, in order to quickly gain a foothold, and then expand the land and enslave the indigenous people to expand the population. Whether it is Heir or Hudic, they all know a truth: with land, there are resources, and with population, there is productivity and troops. At present, Vinland's population is only more than 10,000. Although there should be a few thousand in the western mountainous area, there are not many people who are fully paid. Among them, there are 1,000 white people. Heir knows that, as time goes by, even if there is a fleet after continuously transporting whites to Vinland, after breeding for 1 or 2 generations, the majority of Vinland's population is still Bedak. How can you be in peace for a long time? Let the Bedak people do things for themselves and be slaves in peace. Under the influence of the 8 banners Viking system packaged by Olaf, Heir felt that it was necessary to expand towards the mainland, and let the Bedak people in large numbers on Vinland Island enslave other indigenous peoples on the mainland under his leadership. In this way, a pyramid structure of layers of subcontracting can be formed, and only the white Vikings with the smallest number and the highest status can have a stable position. Therefore, Hudic went to the mainland to rule the Basque base as the Basque governor this time, with a strategic purpose of stabilizing the existing land and then gradually eroding it. Considering all aspects of ability, loyalty, friendship, etc., Heir can only bear the pain to let Hudic take on this task. Hudic did have the ability to lead a party. After he landed ashore, he found that the indigenous people occupying the stronghold houses and fortresses had almost escaped. He snorted, turned on his horse, and looked at the more than 300 slaves and 30 Vikings around him. The soldier wielded a longsword in his hand and said, "A Viking soldier led 10 slaves, scattered and arrested the natives. Whoever caught the natives was the slave of whoever, whether the Vikings or the Bedaks." Hudic's order was quickly conveyed by the Bedak slave captain who understood Icelandic. More than 300 people were excited to rush out of the coast under the leadership of the Viking master, and rush to the aboriginals who fled in all directions. An hour later, Hudic sat in the neatly cleaned fortress, and 30 cheerful white Vikings stepped in with muskets to report on the situation. After hunting, the 10 teams of hunters all gained something. Many caught more than 10 people, while the few caught 3 people. There was also a slave who stepped on the trap near the lake to catch the beaver, and then plunged into the water. Drowned in it, Hudic waved his hand and ordered the Viking soldiers to quickly lead the slaves and their new slaves to clean up the corners and houses of the stronghold, and at the same time move the ship's items into the fort. This wave captured more than 80 slaves, but only 10 young men. This shows that 40 or even more than 50 male indigenous people have escaped. Maybe a large number of indigenous fighters will come and attack soon. Come. Weagle, come here. Thinking of this, Hudic chanted the name of a Viking again. When the middle-aged man walked in, Hudic ordered, "Go and take out the 50 pairs of plate armor and other weapons in my room for convenience. Then send a few slaves with good eyesight and spirit to the surrounding area. When the indigenous people are calling, we will rush to warn us. We must prepare in advance." "Okay, Lord Governor." Weagle agreed and left quickly. Hudic walked out the window and watched the Viking soldiers in the camp leading the slaves to clean up the house. At the same time, he turned his head to look at the dense dark forests in the north and west that followed the ups and downs of the mountains. His eyes flashed with ambition and lofty ambition. The fierce brilliance made the scars around his eyes come alive like a centipede with teeth and claws. In Hudic's sight, Weagle quickly selected 8 Beothuk slaves with the best eyesight, and then these 8 slaves carrying their bows and arrows disappeared in the forests of the west and the north. You reading www.uucanchu.com. But Hudic didn't worry that these slaves would run away, because they didn't dare. First of all, the families of these slaves are on the island. As long as they dare to escape, the family will not survive. Moreover, they are Beothuks. In the eyes of the mainland natives, they are all under the hands of the woodland white people. Just now they participated in the arrest. The behavior of the indigenous people can be regarded as offending the indigenous people near the whaling point. To the root, it is impossible for them to survive without Wenlan. In addition, the relationship between the Beothuks and other wild tribes on the mainland has not been good for hundreds of years. Now any Beothuk will fall into the hands of other indigenous people. There is only a dead end. This kind of tension will also make the Beothuk people have to work hard in many cases. The existence of external factors is a necessary factor to promote endogenous motivation, just as some countries in later generations will provoke external contradictions when their domestic contradictions are prominent or when they want a re-election, so as to attract the attention of domestic people and the same enemies. To achieve their political goals by creating a tense atmosphere, your political starting point is to participate in the anti-Semitic movement, and then to become a leader or even an organizer through excellent language incitement. The people who unite around him are those who are squeezed and exploited by the capitalists under the Industrial Revolution situation, to the point of no squeeze. Frustrated people, they can only hate the Jews who possess most of the wealth. From this point of view, the fate of the Jews in that period was very similar to that of the Chinese in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Australia, and America. But in the eyes of politicians, there is a common enemy. Even if two nations, political parties, and factions have irreconcilable contradictions, they will hold their noses to cooperate or temporarily put aside their internal contradictions before destroying the enemy. But people don't think so. Chapter 114, Experimental Firing of Bone China. When Hudic left Grote for the Basque whaling site, Olaf also got an exciting good news. Old Gelder finally came back a month after leaving the city of Grote with 6 potters, and told Olaf that they had found a clay mine suitable for making pottery in the plateau in the middle of Wenland hinterland. Clay mines have also been found in the southwest of Wenland and the north and south Changling Mountains in the northwest. These clay mines are very large and have good clay texture. Olaf looked at some of the samples they took and found that these were not kaolin. Some of them were similar to kaolin or guanine clay, but most of them had dust similar to broken glass slag. This made his mind flash and reminded him of later generations. Canada is home to the world's largest asbestos mine, and these clays are almost always a subsidiary product of asbestos mine. Asbestos mine has many functions, and it can be used in textiles, construction and other aspects, but Olaf only knows that later generations of asbestos tiles are very good, and cement can be used to make them because he didn't think of how to use it. Olaf temporarily put aside the idea of mining asbestos, but with a big wave of his hand, Old Gelder took his 30 male slaves to mine the clay mine. When Olaf founded Viking Ray and Heir, he got 50 private slaves who could be assigned to the first level of ores. He was in charge of 2 atoms, so he got 100 private slaves, which he usually gave to 2 selected production captains management in order to collect clay mines. This time, Olaf asked Old Gelder to pick 30 of the strongest servants. In the afternoon, the slaves carrying shovels, shovel and other tools took 2 Viking captains under the leadership of Old Gelder. The ship left 5 days later. The first ship returned under the leadership of 2 potters. They mined the clay full of the ship, but because Wendland's livestock is small now, the slaves are not as valuable as the cattle and horses, so they can only be carried by the slaves. It finally took 2 days to transport all of them to the factory. After the clay from the second ship was also transported back to Grote, Olaf began to make pottery with 6 pottery craftsmen. To make pottery, we must first build a kiln. This work does not require Olaf's participation. He just watched the craftsmen instruct the apprentices and slaves to use stones and mud to build a huge cave dwelling as high as 3 people, and then set it aside to let it dry naturally, and then add a layer of mud. A week later, the pottery kiln was built, and then the 6 potters personally made clay, blanks, shapes, patterns, etc., from start to finish, but after the production, they dictated the apprentices' experience. A few days later, the first pottery was released, but because it was a new kiln, various problems appeared. The potters were very dissatisfied, so they smashed the pottery, then continued to strengthen the kiln and fired a second pottery burn paper continuously to make defective products in 2 kilns. Until the piles of firewood were used up, the pottery of the third kiln met the requirements of the potters, and it was enough for sale in terms of hardness and appearance. But after seeing it, Olaf was still very dissatisfied. These pottery is enough for his life, but Olaf wants to make a saleable product. But even if the pottery is loaded into a ship and brought to Europe, it can't sell for a few pounds. Gold coins. Ordinary Arabic porcelain can be worth dozens of hundreds of pottery. If the porcelain from the Far East can be exchanged for a ship of pottery. Olaf himself does not know the skills and knowledge of making porcelain, but he knows how to make bone china. In the actual history, bone china was invented by the British in 1794. This kind of porcelain, which was made by mixing animal bone powder and clay, was a technique developed by Westerners to imitate Eastern porcelain. It was considered a novel system at the time. Porcelain technology, and then a set of crystal clear or bone china sold at sky-high prices at that time, basically close to the high-end porcelain from the Far East such as thin porcelain. Olaf knows that bone china is made by mixing ordinary clay with kaolin and bone meal. The first time it is fired into pottery, and then it is glazed and fired a second time it becomes bone china, but bone china is more than 100 years old. The success rate of later inventions is extremely low. Olaf only knew some theories, and didn't know if there were any omissions, so he told the Old Gelder and 6 potters. They were also the first to hear that they were made with animal bone meal and white kaolin. Pottery can become the beautiful and expensive porcelain in the East, which makes them full of energy. After making thousands of pots, bowls and other tools, the apprentices gradually mastered the skills. And then 2 of the 6 potters every day knew that the apprentices made pottery, and the others made a small cave at the foot of the mountain. Then studied the firing of bone china. These 6 potters are all experienced master craftsmen. When they were in their hometown, they were skilled workers in the noble master kiln. They can fire thousands of high-quality pottery every year, both in technology and technique. Therefore, after receiving the bone china recipe taught by Olaf, he quickly entered the trial production stage, and quickly kneaded the rough blank, then finally carved and patted the shape, and finally fired. However, bone china does not know that it can be successfully made by mixing clay, china clay and disappointment. If it can be made casually, porcelain will not become a symbol of Chinese civilization for thousands of years, and bone china will not become the West. Representative works of porcelain. Generally speaking, no matter which type of porcelain it is the crystallization of the wisdom of one or even multiple civilizations. It is a technological product developed through the efforts of many generations. Olaf, after seeing the successive failures of the potters, also reflected on his eagerness for quick success and quick gain, and then encouraged them to explore slowly. Time soon entered June. After more than 20 failures, the potters finally found a complete vessel in a cracked pottery. This is a 1-foot diameter, 2-foot high clay pot. The shape is in the Nordic traditional style, which looks simple and primitive. The engraved patterns are also cross patterns and lion mane patterns. Traditional pottery is khaki or gray with rough surface. If you apply paint on the pattern, it is a good vessel. And this kind of pottery made with bone meal and other materials mixed and fired in a certain proportion is smooth to the touch, and when you look closer, the texture is somewhat like white plaster, but the hardness is far better than plaster. Olaf asked the potters to prepare the glaze again. And after firing it for the second time, the jar was very close to the ordinary white porcelain jar. Both the appearance and the texture were basically the same. Olaf picked up the jar and placed it next to the fire. The fire shined through the jar to reflect the porcelain jar with a jade-like texture. www.wooxiaspit.com. Although the light transmittance was poor, it was indeed a successful bone china. Very well. Keep up the good work. This time, all 6 potters will reward the dried fish with 100 pounds. If you can find the correct recipe and fix the bone china, I will ask your father to give you a place of Wildert without asking him. Olaf is not stingy about the treatment and rewards of scientific research personnel. After speaking, the 6 potters happily thanked them, and then hurried to continue their research. I don't know if it was due to luck or a problem with the material. After that, the potters burned more than 10 kills, wasting 50 to 60 models and tens of thousands of pounds of firewood. As a result, a finished bone china failed. After firing, it is basically either cracked or broken. Olaf watched it once, and then reminded them to adjust the proportions. After dozens of attempts, they were finally able to fire the bone chinaware again, but there were only 1 or 2 of them in a kill, and the rest were deformed and cracked, became a waste product, and the average firing of 5 kills can only produce bone china from another kill. Olaf is very satisfied with his success rate. After all, the bone china of the fired product is as fine as jade and white as milk. In Europe, it fooled the rich and foolish nobles and rich men from various countries, and it was enough to pretend to be the fine porcelain produced in the Far East. Up now, a set of fine porcelain produced by Ming Dynasty can be sold at a price of tens of thousands of pounds in silver. In addition to the royal families and church leaders of various countries, only the top nobles and rich people can enjoy it. Although bone china is not comparable to high-quality porcelain, it is definitely not a problem to pretend to be a medium-grade porcelain. This grade of porcelain can also be valuable, and the price far exceeds skin and royal jelly. Olaf believes that as long as his factory can slowly produce bone china, it will bring benefits beyond skin and royal jelly next year, and become another pillar industry of Winland. Chapter 115, Ancestral Tradition. When the Olaf factory was tinkering with refining porcelain at the beginning, Heir and others felt that Olaf was fooling around. European countries have tried to imitate porcelain for hundreds of thousands of years, but many talented craftsmen have failed. How can Olaf and the 6 potters make porcelain? Isn't that a miracle? But with the appearance of the first bone china, the people of Heir, Hudik, Hoskard, Kadir, Heine and others who saw the porcelain vase were shocked. They touched the porcelain vase with love, just like touching the skin of a lover, and then Heir ecstatically rewarded Olaf with a wealth of 300 slaves, 100 reindeer, and 100 wilget with the production of bone china. Olaf's prestige and status in the city of Herat have been raised to another level. All high-level, middle-level and even ordinary Vikings and slaves have reincarnated Master Olaf as Lord Heir's ancestor, the heroic spirit. The rumors are convinced the various performances of a 12-year-old boy surpassed adults, even literate and knowledgeable figures, and possessed all kinds of miracles. How could this not be worshipped, awed and trusted by the superstitious people of the 17th century? While Olaf led the pottery artisans to study bone china, the pottery apprentices and other artisans were not idle. They were constantly consuming various raw materials shipped by slaves in the city of Grodin. The 30-odd days from May to the beginning of June, numerous colorful and dazzling products have been created, which surprised Heir, Jot, Hoskard and Olaf when they saw it. There are the most wooden utensils and tools. At a glance, there are tens of thousands of pieces, and there are hundreds of stone utensils, but there are more tools combined with stone and wood. There are nearly 1,000 pieces. There are also more than 400 pots and pots. The remaining leather shoes, leather clothes, leather pants, etc. are countless, with a total of nearly 1,000 pieces. These are not made of expensive and precious leather. The advantage is that they are durable and strong, and the style is far better than that of Bidak and Ikis. The Moroccan made it looks good. The pen makers have also produced hundreds of exquisite quill pens, all of which are made from the sturdy feathers of eagles and huge seabirds shot by hunters on the island. Together with the quill are dozens of barrels of plants and black ink made of minerals. If these goods are packaged and shipped to Europe for sale, they can be sold for a little money in addition to the barren Nordic region. If it is in other regions, things other than leather clothes and shoes may not be sold, but even in the Nordic region, these items are not enough to buy a ship of flour. However, in the New World where materials are scarce and also lack of technical personnel and handicrafts, the value of these items will double, because whether they are colonists from Europe or the aborigines of the New World, they have a demand for all kinds of daily necessities made by woodland craftsmen. If they get all kinds of tools, they will improve their quality of life, so that the indigenous people no longer have to rely on the simple items made by the rough methods of the old people. and the British and French colonists no longer have to wait for the rare items shipped from Europe. Olaf immediately discussed with Hader and the others after seeing the mountain of goods piled up in the warehouse, and planned to consume a batch in the city of Groot, and then transport a batch to New England and New France for sale, and even bring it to the mainland. The savage tribes traded in exchange for fur and other items. New England and New France have a strong demand for food, clothing, living tools and other necessities of life, but rely on the high cost and small number of merchant ships to and from the New World and Europe. Therefore, most of the colonies are white slaves and colonists. All of them adapt to life and endure the inconveniences of life inside Hardenberg. Olaf made a proposal to sell factory products to the two colonies. All the senior officials in Harrod's city agreed, and Yacht also said with a smile, "The Janus who followed Hagrid is a servant of your father. He once said that Hagrid in New England and New France were originally. It is just to solve the problem of food, clothing, and warmth. I don't think about other problems. After a long time, everyone is like a beast, and they have forgotten the days of civilized society. This shows that the lives of people living in the New World are inconvenient because of the lack of tools. Now our neighbors are still suffering from this kind of pain. I think the daily necessities produced by Olaf will be very popular. This is a good way for us to exchange wealth from the French and British." Oris also echoed, "The second young master's factory is amazing. We used to have a large tribe with few people who can make tools. Usually only the leader can enjoy all kinds of living utensils. Now, if the factory's goods can be shipped to the mainland, the Iroquois, the Hurons, the Abnaki, and the Carry will all be willing to exchange fur." Oris now speaks Old Norse as well as the Icelandic. The more he feels his insignificance as he lives in the city of Groot, the more he realizes that Lord Hader is very knowledgeable and powerful. Although he is very smart, I also guess that Hader is not a god, and the so-called sky fire and thunder is only a magic weapon, but he is still very loyal and superstitious after seeing that the second young master Olaf was able to surrender the smallpox curse that had plagued the Bedak people for 100 years. Oris was convinced of what others had said about the miracles of Hader, Olaf and others. Raf is also in awe. Oris' words, "The leaders here will not ignore www.uxiaspit.com because he can express opinions on behalf of the indigenous people." Olaf said with a smile, "Our Viking ancestors used to have knives in one hand and money in the other. The organic combination of robbery and trading is the fine tradition of our Vikings. I can first contact many of our neighbors through business activities. Maybe we don't have to fight vigorously. Through the penetration of commodities, we can slowly surrender the indigenous people and let them work for us." Olaf knows the strategic significance of economic sanctions in later generations, and also understands the strategic layout and influence that can be exerted by controlling the urgently needed products of other countries. The game of chips, soybeans, pork, cotton and other commodities deeply reflects the mastery of commercial initiative. The power of power. Olaf feels that if neighbors around him accept, get used to, and adapt to the various living utensils provided by Vinland, Vinland will also be able to influence their purchase and sales demand for other items in the future, and will be able to induce even through trade inequality control the conflicts and struggles between one force and another, or buy indigenous people through the gift of commodity resources to help them attack other indigenous tribes, etc. But obviously Hader didn't understand Olaf's subtext. They were just discussing how much fur and wealth they can get from selling items. Although Olaf's conjecture did not arouse everyone's interest, it was indeed a behavior that everyone agreed to sell their products produced in the factory. So on the second day, the Vikings with muskets and swords brought slaves, warriors and many other commodities. Rowed the Viking longboat and left Port Harrod, heading towards the neighboring territory. This time Hader sent 200 Vikings and 1,000 slave warriors. They drove away all the ships on the island and divided them into 4 teams to the strongholds in New England and New France, and to the north and south banks of the St. Lawrence River. Indigenous territory. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 116, Joint Operations. When the Vikings left Wenland with the slave warriors to seek buyers at the prices set by the senior leaders of Viking Lay, a decision was being prepared at the Red Bay Basque whaling site on the northern shore of the ocean on Wenland Island. The Battle of Land's future destiny. On June 12, 1629, the Basque governor Hudic stood in front of the Basque castle, Wearing a plate armor, with a long sword and flying spear hanging from his waist, his face shield was pushed aside to reveal the scar in the corner of his eye and firmness. Stern eyes in front of Hudic were more than 600 fighters, among which were 330 Viking militia standing straight and forming a square formation, consisting of 30 Viking soldiers and 300 Beduc slaves. Warrior behind the 330 militiamen stood 200 strong indigenous males. These were all slaves captured by the Viking militia for a month. Some of them were Cree, some were Huron, but the most were Abu. A branch of the Eastern Naki people. Penobscot people. Hudic changed its name to Basque City after he came to the Basque whaling side in early May. At the same time, he led his Viking militia to defeat the Peniscourts, and then captured and enslaved more than 100 people later. The Viking militia defeated 3 tribes that had lost a large number of men in previous battles, and captured more than 400 prisoners, of which only more than 100 young men. This led to the fact that there were no indigenous tribes within 30 miles after entering June. The Basque City had 541 savages slaves, most of whom were Penobscots. In order to better manage the slaves, Hudic made a small number of Cree and Hurons become Penis. The production team captain and team leader of the Scot people, in order to prevent the Penobscot people from forming a group and giving birth to disputes and undesirable thoughts. Originally, Hudic planned to train the slave soldiers in June, and then waited until the end of the month to lead all the militia and slave soldiers to attack the indigenous camps in the west. The Cree, Abnaki and Huron living on the north bank of the St. Lawrence River. People don't have too many tribes, because the climate here is far worse than the Henan Bank. Moreover, the population of indigenous people on the north shore east of the estuary is not large. The real densely populated areas are still near New France, the southwest and the due south. Through investigation, Hudic felt that before winter, he was enough to lead an army to occupy the entire northern land of Anticosti, which is the Labrador area of the later generation. However, at the end of May, Hudic saw a messenger sent by Francis. The messenger sent by Francis brought Francis's autograph letter. It was Francis who invited Hudic to fight together with him to conquer the entire Rado area. Hudic is naturally happy to join forces with the French soldiers. This will reduce the pressure on his side and reduce the number of soldiers in the battle. It will also allow the boys under him to see the style of the French soldiers. According to the agreed date, June 12th is the day when the two sides will gather in Jesu Bay on the north shore. After gathering the team, Hudic will take the Viking longboat to leave the Red Bay and drive eastward along the coast at noon. I came to Jesu Bay, just north of Anticosti Island, and sailed from Jesu Bay into Jesu River. Standing at the bow of the ship, Hudic saw more than 80 French soldiers and 200 Hurons on the slopes of the north bank. Warrior after docking and disembarking, Hudic found that the northern bank was a mudflat formed by the impact of the river and the tide that poured into the river. The higher part of the north was a forest of forests. The mouth of the Jesu River became narrower and narrower towards the upper reaches of the river. There are also rock hills and reefs, and only small boats can pass. Hudic, who did not dare to take the risk and use the Viking longboat experiment, led his army to join Francis, and then under the leadership of Francis's Huron warriors who were familiar with the terrain, they walked up the Jesu River, preparing to attack the northern valley. Inhabited by several tribes of Cree and Penobscot. According to Francis's men, the northeastern part of the land on the north bank of the St. Lawrence River is very sparsely populated. There are only 7 or 8 large tribes, and they all live in the valleys around the Jesu River because the land in Labrador is full of mountain forests and the roads are rugged and difficult to navigate. The team of more than 700 people is not moving fast. It wasn't until the sky was dark that the native tribe in the first river valley was found, and then the Huron and Viking slave warriors took the lead in attacking and rushed into the native tribe. The screams of killing from the arrows shot one after another. After the French soldiers and Viking soldiers fired a round of muskets, the indigenous tribes in the valley lost their resistance. After the war, Hudic and Francis, who lived in the tribal house, learned that there were more than 300 people in the tribe, including more than 130 male fighters. Now more than half have been killed, leaving only more than 50 men captive. There are less than 300 people left in the entire tribe, and they were robbed by Viking slaves and Hurons as slaves. The next morning, Francis and Hudic divided a part of Huron and Viking slaves to guard the slaves in the tribe, and then led the remaining army to attack another river valley tribe. 5 days later, Hudic and Francis led 500 soldiers to break the 5th big tribe, killed more than 100 indigenous warriors, and captured more than 400 indigenous slaves. But because of many wars, both sides' bullets and gunpowder were consumed severely, and the Huron warrior and the slave warrior were seriously injured. This made Hudic and Francis both retreat. The two believe that there are no large tribes in the southern region of Labrador. At most there are small tribes with dozens of people. This will not harm the future rule of both sides. Now you can consider the issue of rule and management. www.wuxiaspit.com. In terms of conquest by force, the entire southern area of Labrador has become the territory of New France and Vinland. According to the previous mapping and calculation of Champlain, this area is roughly half or even more than half the area of Vinland. If it were not because of the severe cold, the land was too barren and the population was too small, it can be said that only a few hundred people would definitely not be able to conquer it, since the food and resources of the Basque city could not supply too many people for the time being. New France was also facing this situation, so Hudic and Francis left some soldiers and slaves to rule in the 5 tribes, and appointed some Mic women to manage them. The tribe served as the chief to manage the slaves, and then each left Labrador with a small number of slaves. When Hudic returned to Basque City, he sent people to deliver a message to Groot City, reporting the good news of the occupation of Labrador. At the same time, he hoped that Groot City could bring more food, grass, food and supplies. After all, Hudic manages Pakistan. It is difficult to produce in the city of Skok, mainly military occupation and rule, and then radiating the entire southern Labrador, ordering the indigenous people to turn in for another resources. Labrador's climate and environment cannot be farmed, but it can be grazing, so Hudic also asked Hader to send some professional herders, sheep, reindeer, etc., to breed here, and at the same time train slaves into herders. The southern region of Labrador has become another supply base for Vinland's meat, fur, timber and other resources. Francis, who returned to New France, wrote the second letter himself, preparing to be taken back to Paris in 2 days. The military exploits of expanding the territory of New France are enough for him to go further. Francis was very ambitious at his age. He was eager to be promoted in the war, and even returned to France, to establish merits in the European wars, to obtain titles and land. Chapter 117, New England Changes. New England Colony. The atmosphere in Plymouth was tense. Dozens of people from the Puritans held muskets and looked at the hundreds of musketeers in front of them with pale expressions. Leading the Puritan is the young Pastor McGonagall. Behind him stands most of the Puritan parliamentarians. Opposite them from Pastor McGonagall are armed sailors from the Plymouth Company, headed by Governor William and Mr. Miller McGonagall. Elder Breast has fallen into coma. As his friend, I must take him back to London. His illness can only be treated in London. Do you want to kill him? Governor William is a burly man in his 30s, wearing leather armor and a felt hat. The two ends of the mustache on his lips are raised high, and he looks at McGonagall with a serious face. McGonagall's face was tense and pale. He glanced at his companion, who was gradually losing his courage, and his heart was mixed. It turns out that due to the bad conditions in New England, some people will die every year due to the battles with the natives and various diseases. Of course, this is also because the leaders of the colony do not produce, but the white slaves are constantly being squeezed. Many people is also because the leaders do not produce, so many leaders cannot stand the harsh environment and primitive conditions in New England. Because of dysentery, smallpox, typhoid and other diseases have also died several in the winter. The residents of New England burned firewood indoors to keep warm. Elder Breast was choked by smoke several times because of asthma. As a result, his condition worsened and he was already seriously ill twice in the spring. Although McGonagall and William, the governor, invited an Indian witch doctor who lived next to him for treatment, but the effect was not satisfactory. Recently, the weather has warmed up, but Breast has fallen into coma and is close to a dying state. Before Breast was in a coma, he called McGonagall in front of him and told him to protect himself, because as long as he died or left New England, McGonagall could not inherit his position to lead New England based on his prestige. People, the Governor William of Plymouth Company will definitely want to control the power of Plymouth City, and the status of the Puritan will not be guaranteed. By that time, Pastor McGonagall kept the instructions of Elder Breast in mind, and then stood by Elder Breast's side to take care of him every day. But as Elder Breast's health became worse and worse, Governor William couldn't bear it. Together with Miller on the Puritan side, he wanted to send Breast back to London for treatment and take away the unconscious Elder Breast. Although McGonagall is not sensitive, he also guessed that they had bad intentions. Although Breast is in a coma, the Puritans are still united by his side. If Breast leaves New England and Miller has made it clear that he supports Governor William, then McGonagall will completely lose his rights and be formed by the Puritans in a dismal heart. The council that governs Plymouth City will also become a decoration. So McGonagall led the Puritans to defend the unconscious Brest, and both sides even took coercive measures during the stalemate. Governor William came forward and softly persuaded McGonagall's tight body to relax a little. He shook his head and said, "Elder Brest's body can no longer support the running on the sea. We better wait here for his awakening and listen to him," commanded. Miller sneered. And the hook nose seemed to be more curved. "Why don't you let us treat Elder Brest? Do you want to kill him? So that you can inherit the position of the Elder and control the council? His body is almost unsupported, and he must return to London immediately. Saved. If you disagree with us taking away the Elders for treatment, there is a ghost in your heart. You talk nonsense." McGonagall's face flushed red, and he pointed to Miller angrily and said, "I don't have the ambition to inherit the position of the Elder. I don't want you to save. It's the Elder who asked me." Miller and William were overjoyed when they saw McGonagall's emotions. Then the two continued to be aggressive and the other was relieved. After a while, McGonagall was speechless and seemed to disagree with them taking Bryce away. The request of the special Elder proved that he was the murderer who caused the serious illness of Elder Brest, and was ambitious. There were only 2 Puritans around McGonagall who helped him speak at first, but it didn't work. In the end McGonagall couldn't bear the pressure, so he could only approve Miller and Governor William's request in frustration, and then McGonagall asked for the best relationship with him. The 2 companions will follow Elder Brest to board the ship in London, so that they can take care of the safety of the Elders on the way. Elder Brewster and 2 Puritans, who were unconscious that afternoon, were accompanied by animal skins. They left New England on an armed merchant ship of the Plymouth Company and headed east in the sea, riding the wind and waves. After Elder Brest and the 2 councillors left, Plymouth City spent 2 days of calm. But on the 3rd day, Governor William announced the dissolution of the Puritan Council and the establishment of the Plymouth Council. The Plymouth and other colonists served as members of the council. Then the Plymouth Company was responsible for and managed everything in the colony. McGonagall was very angry about this, but after he protested, he found that almost all the Puritans had stood behind Miller, and Miller became the first Speaker of the Parliament within a few days. The humiliated McGonagall found out that there was no one beside him to rely on. The colony of New England has no place for McGonagall except Virginia in the south. Now McGonagall has the only option to go back to London besides going to Virginia. Reading www.canchu.com. Feeling the increasingly unfriendly atmosphere in Plymouth, McGonagall decided to leave Plymouth and return to London temporarily. McGonagall decided to go back to London to find his teacher Brest and 2 other friends. Maybe they can seek help from the Massachusetts Company, which is the most powerful of the 3 companies that have participated in colonizing New England in the past 2 years. Has always been at odds with Plymouth. On June 20th, McGonagall finally boarded a ship returning from the Creek Company. After McGonagall left Plymouth by boat in an embarrassing manner, Miller and William in the city learned of the situation for the first time. Miller thought for a while and got up to find William. "Your Excellency, McGonagall wants to go back to London on a Creek Company ship. Do you know, Governor William is sitting on the sofa holding a pipe and smoking tobacco, which is unique to America. He has been obsessed with the smoky feeling and the smell of cigarettes since last year." Seeing Miller come in and beckon him to take a sip, Miller rejecting his talent, he smashed the ashes, put away his pipe and said, "I just heard, a loser." "What does he do?" Miller frowned, and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid he won't be able to find Brest, George, and Byrom when he arrives in London and will cause trouble." This, Governor William sat upright slowly, then tapped his fingers on the table and said, "Then send someone to catch up with Merchant Creek, pay the captain, and throw McGonagall into the sea to feed the fish. Bryce, as soon as I fall, I will have no opponents in Plymouth. Since McGonagall wants to be my opponent, let him go to the bottom of the sea to accompany the 3 of Brest." Miller's eyes flashed with joy, and then said, "I will arrange for someone to go." After that, Miller left like a gust of wind. Chapter 118, Grab This Ship. The armed merchant ships of the Creek Company docked in 3 colonies in New England one after another, and then they brought fur and other items to prepare for the last replenishment from the northern base of New Scotland, also known as the Nova Scotia Peninsula, and set sail to cross the North Atlantic, back to London. By the time the 2 armed forces of the Creek Company were in the eastern waters of the island, there were fewer and fewer fishing boats. Just when the sun was west and the sky was getting darker, a few sailors carried a nailed wooden barrel. Go to the side of the ship, and then join forces to throw the barrel under the ship. Puff, waves as high as 3 people were blasted on the sea, and then the barrel would drift away in the floating and sinking. and maybe it would be soaked by the sea in less than 10 minutes and sink also in the afterglow of the sun. A fleet of 16 large ships emerged on the eastern sea, and then rushed westward violently. 13 of these 16 ships are armed merchant ships. Their identities are betrayed by the tall and narrow hull and the movable wooden windows on the ship. Behind those wooden windows are black hull artillery. 13 armed merchant ships surrounded 3 potbelly merchant ships and a mixed sail clipper, and each ship was hung with a flag with a cross pattern of hammocks, which means that this fleet does not represent any country. The captains of the 2 armed merchant ships of the Creek Company were shocked when they saw the huge oncoming fleet, and breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the flag clearly. It's the flag of England. Why do these Icelanders have more boats? The captain murmured enviously, and then prepared to bypass Winland's fleet. This fleet was Hagrid and Olaf, who had returned from Europe. Olaf and Hagrid took the newly purchased armed land island and walked on the deck to look excitedly. We have left Winland for 2.5 months, right? Hagrid asked, turning his head to look at Olaf. Olaf nodded, and then sighed. This time we went well as a whole, and did not live up to my dad's expectations. That's an English merchant ship. While speaking, Olaf saw the sea on the west. 2 armed merchant ships appeared. When the flags were clearly seen, they were recognized as British merchant ships. Hagrid also looked over, and after a while the 2 fleets passed by. Suddenly a water finger pointed at the sea and yelled, "Ah! What's in the sea?" Both Hagrid and Olaf looked down and found that a wooden barrel was floating up and down on the sea not far away, which seemed to be sinking. Catch it up and take a look. Hagrid and Olaf looked at each other. Olaf suddenly turned to look at the British ship that had reached the back of his fleet, and said loudly. Several sailors immediately jumped into the sea with hemp rope around their waists to salvage the wooden barrel. After a while, the wooden barrel was lifted to the deck. When the lid was opened, a sailor said in surprise, "It's a human." After the barrel was put down, a young man fell out with the water flowing out. Hagrid and Olaf frowned because they recognized the young man in the barrel. "I remember his name is McGonagall. Isn't he a Plymouth in Plymouth? Last winter he came to Harroot City on behalf of Elder Brest to talk to us for cooperation, and wanted to drive the Frenchmen away. Remember?" Hagrid asked the sailor to treat McGonagall, who was already in a coma. "I remember that when he appeared here, he must have been thrown down from the 2 merchant ships just now." Olaf knew that killing people at sea and punishing disobedient sailors and sinners were thrown into the sea, but in order not to kill people, most of whose sins were to turn people into wooden barrels and then throw them away. Looking at McGonagall's state, it was obvious that he had just entered the water not long ago. Ahem. With the help of the sailor, McGonagall coughed up seawater suddenly, then slowly regained consciousness and regained his sanity after a while. Both Hagrid and Olaf learned from McGonagall that he was murdered, and they also knew that the Puritan Council in New England seemed to be completely disintegrated. A governor supported by a commercial company is by no means a good neighbor. Under the influence of Olaf and Heir, Olaf has a sensitive understanding of Plymouth matters, so he looked at McGonagall and said softly, "For God's sake, I must help Pastor McGonagall, and through what happened to you I suspect that Elder Brest has also suffered an accident." "What?" The pale McGonagall got up suddenly in surprise, and his pale lips kept trembling. He also thought of this terrible fact, so he looked at Olaf and Hagrid and asked, "Can I ask you to help me investigate the situation? I know it might be rude to make such a request." Olaf knew that McGonagall was highly valued by Elder Brest years ago, and if he makes good use of him now, it may be an opportunity to mess up New England and at least divide the strength of the British. "Pastor McGonagall, don't worry." Olaf patted McGonagall on the shoulder, turned to look at Hagrid, and asked, "Uncle, we will turn the bow of the ship right away and catch up with the 2 ships. What are you doing?" "Rob them," Hagrid said, remembering that he hadn't been a pirate for more than 5 years, and his hands were itchy for a while, so he immediately ordered to turn the bow to chase the 2 creeks that hadn't gone far. The company's armed merchant ships. I suspect that the person who hired the sailor to kill Pastor McGonagall is still on the boat. I don't think anyone can rest assured if I don't see the big thing in person." Olaf rubbed his chin and said, "We are going to help Pastor McGonagall to get justice, and we must board the ship for inspection." "Uncle, you said we have so many armed merchant ships. What happened to them even if we robbed them?" "Yes," Hagrid laughed. "Snatch them." 20 minutes later, the flagships of Hagrid and Olaf led 3 armed merchant ships to catch up with the armed merchant ships of Creek Company, which had been upgraded to the fastest speed because Hagrid's flagship and the other 3 ships took very few people. The draft was shallow and the speed was fast, and it was close to the British ship. "Crash!" Hagrid shouted loudly, and all 4 ships sprinted with all their strength. like a swordfish, toward the Creek Company's ship. The British captains on both ships were so scared that one ship was still running at full force, while the other ship turned sideways, preparing to launch a round of shelling. Seeing the British armed merchant ships turning their bows to greet them sideways, Hagrid knew they wanted to fire, so he ordered the 4 ships to disperse and circle around the 2 British ships, while also firing artillery attacks. Boom! The huge iron ball roared into the water www.ooksiaspit.com and stirred up a large water curtain. But 1 or 2 shots hit the hull, causing slight damage, but Wenland's 4 armed merchant ships shot dozens of large holes in the deck hulls of 2 British ships in one round. After all, they had twice the firepower and instantly suppressed the British. After 2 rounds of shooting, Hagrid hurriedly ordered an impact, and then the 4 ships crashed into 2 British ships. The collision angle of the bow penetrated deeply into the bodies of the 2 British ships, followed by what the Vikings were best at: fight. On the sidelines under the leadership of Hagrid and Olaf, the sailors and Viking soldiers rushed into the 2 ships by setting up a plank. Under the lead of Hagrid smashing them to death with a big axe, the Vikings killed more than a dozen. The sailor who dared to resist, Bren, even killed a captain in the end. After the battle, Hagrid captured the remaining 40 people on the British ship, and also received 2 large ships and a lot of goods and supplies. Still looking for Iceland Rise free novels? Baidu direct search. It's easy to read novels. Chapter 119, Take Revenge for You. A classic and quick Viking robbery battle broke out at dusk, and it was over when it got dark. Only one sailor on Hagrid's side was cut off with one arm, and the rest were slightly injured, and no attrition occurred. However, the guards and sailors on the British ship suffered heavy casualties. More than 20 people died on the 2 ships, and the remaining 40 people were all injured. After McGonagall's identification, the sailors arrested the person who harmed him and the instigator for interrogation. That messenger was Miller's good friend, a middle-aged man named Ramplin, who told him everything he knew after 2 punches. Yes, it was Miller and William who instigated me. Elder Bristol was also the one who killed them and threw them into the sea. The worry in McGonagall's heart was confirmed by Lampling. He burst into tears instantly, and then recalled the days of following Brest to study and preach to the natives. Hateful. McGonagall knocked Ramplin down with a punch, and then yelled with blood-red eyes, "You are all a bunch of demons. I want to avenge Elder Brest. I want to kill you. You are destined to do it. Hell accepts Satan's torture and doomsday judgment." Ulava came forward and patted McGonagall on the shoulder after he vented and yelled, looked at his eyes solemnly, and said with a sincere expression, "I tell you, Elder Brest and Pastor McGonagall, the experience of the Lord is very sympathetic and angry. A man who was pious to the Lord, a prophet who pointed the way for the lost lamb, and spread the Lord's holy name in the New World, has now been brutally murdered, and even the body is buried in the belly. They really are despicable and shameless villain. I want to help you, don't you know? Thank you very much, Your Excellency Olaf. And Your Excellency Hagrid." McGonagall can absolutely respect his savior and the last straw. He gave a deep salute, and then asked, "Your Excellency Hagrid, Your Excellency Olaf, I know that Vinland is very powerful, in North America. The population strength of the population is more than that of New England and New France. If I want to avenge myself and Elder Brest, George and Byram, I can only ask you to lend a helping hand. If you do justice for us, I will. The land resources of New England are shared with Vinland." McGonagall is not a fool and innocent guy. He knows that Icelanders are willing to help themselves because they have ambitions for the land of New England, but what's the point? Now McGonagall is a poor worm who almost lost his life. Everything about him in the New World no longer exists. At this time McGonagall is already a gambler with nothing. He knows that Wenland only needs to give them a new breakthrough. Justification for England, even if it is impossible for him to control New England in the future, as long as he can get revenge and guarantee the interests of the Puritans, he is willing to help the Icelanders and Vinland defeat the people of Plymouth Company and control Plymouth City. Hagrid turned his head to look at the shivering more than 40 crew members. With a big wave of his hand, the Vikings stepped forward and tied all the more than 40 Englishmen with their hands and feet, and threw them into the sea. Puff! More than 40 falling into the water sounded for the first time, except for the Vikings on the deck. Only McGonagall was an Englishman. McGonagall saw Hagrid murderously, his hands and feet cold with fright. And he secretly regretted asking the Icelandic Vikings to help him, but at this point he could only pretend to be nonchalant. A day later, Wenland's 16-vessel fleet dragged 2 bruised and bruised armed orchids offshore, The French fishing boats and British fishing boats in the East China Sea along the way were scared to avoid being shattered or attacked when they saw the huge fleet. Hagrid, Olaf and others experienced the feeling of crisscrossing the sea. These things like ants are plundering our wealth. We now have a powerful armed fleet. From now on, there will be no other ships stealing our fish in the waters around Wenland. Olaf pointed to the fishing boat that had fled and said in a loud voice. Hagrid laughed openly and said teasingly, "Okay. We will expel them and them. Vikings will reappear in the North Atlantic in the future." When the fleet sailed into Port Herod on the southeastern peninsula of Vinland, it had already alarmed the Vikings, and slaves of Heir and Catelyn took their relatives and friends to the dock to greet Hagrid, Olaf and others who had disembarked after the enthusiastic hug. Everyone gathered in a group and said missed words. At this time, Olaf also rode up to him, yelled and jumped off his horse to hug his uncle and brother cordially. "Uncle. Brother, Olaf, you have grown taller again." Olaf looked at Olaf, who was shoulder high, and said with a chuckle. Hagrid spotted the golden fluff on Olaf's lips and smiled. The blond boy is going to have a beard. Olaf is not shy. He has recently discovered that his body hair has become dense everywhere, and his height has increased by leaps and bounds. It has surpassed most whites. This is a manifestation of puberty. "Brother, do you still recognize this, Pastor?" Hagrid said to Hader, showing the young pastor behind him sideways. Hader raised his brows and smiled. "Is this Pastor McGonagall? Why did you come in Hagrid's boat?" "Thanks to Mr. Hagrid and Mr. Olaf, otherwise I would be thrown into the sea and drowned." McGonagall bowed to salute, and then explained, "What's the matter?" Hader frowned. Olaf approached Hader and told him what had happened. Then Hader's eyes flickered, and then he ordered McGonagall to rest first. "Please, Pastor McGonagall, first take a bath and rest, and I will send someone to invite you to attend the reception tonight." After Pastor McGonagall left, everyone had a conversation. Hagrid suddenly squeezed and coughed. When everyone looked at him, he stumbled and said, What's happening?" Hader asked suspiciously. His brother almost never looked like this in his mind. Hagrid still babbled unclearly, but Olaf laughed and said, "When we were picking up a white slave in Ireland half a month ago, the uncle met his true love, and he wanted to introduce you to each other." "Oh!" everyone exclaimed in unison, and then looked at Hagrid with different expressions. Hader and Catelyn were surprised on their faces, Kadir and Horskild grinned strangely, and John and the others were very curious. Olaf is also very curious. He is also very curious about the beloved uncle met, because according to his understanding, Hagrid is 34 years old this year, but he only met a beloved girl 11 years ago. As a result, the jealousy caused trouble, and the girl married to Norway. Since Hagrid came to Wenland, he has not had the opportunity to contact women. He is not interested in Kismo and Indian women. This makes people almost ignore that he is a 34-year-old bachelor, but I didn't expect Hagrid to find true love this time. It is really curious what woman captured his ambition of kinming with a thunderbolt. Olaf said what Hagrid said, which made Hagrid suddenly relaxed. He recovered his heroic manner. He turned his head and shouted at the crowd of sailor guards and white slaves crowded behind him, rolling. "Hurry up, come to meet my family." A woman wearing a light red cross-patterned checkered coat and a sun hat walked out of the crowd, nestled beside Hagrid, her sharp chin lifted up to reveal her white face and delicate features. She looked very beautiful, but the only thing the flaw is that the jawbones on both sides are too wide, making her face not perfect. Rolling more Irish, "It's an honor to meet everyone." Rolling smiled slightly, her lips drawn a beautiful curve, and then she blinked and looked at Hader, who is tall and majestic, and Catelyn next to him, and smiled. "You are brother Hader and sister Catelyn, right? Hagrid always told me about your help and deep affection for him, which made me envious all the time." Catelyn took Rolling's hand and saw that she was about 20 years old, and she was not an ordinary family in dress. She reminded, "You have traveled across oceans for Hagrid and came to Wenland. I hope you don't dislike this place." "The conditions are tough." Rolling gave Hagrid a gentle look, and then said, "I love Hagrid very much. His bravery and strength are the only people I have seen. Before I came, I was prepared to accompany him to endure hardships, so don't worry, Catelyn." "Haha." Hagrid laughed and stretched out his sturdy arms around Rolling next to him, and said, "Speaking of which, Olaf should have an impression. Rolling is Mr. Amor's sister." After Hagrid's explanation, everyone knew the origin of Rolling. It turns out that Rolling is the little sister of the traditional Irish landlord Raleigh Amor. She is 21 years old this year and has been living in her hometown manor. He met Hagrid, who had picked up the white slave more than 20 days ago. The two fell in love at first sight. For a lifetime, Rowling followed Hagrid to Vinland without the consent of the patriarch and brother. www.wooksiaspit.com Hater is very grateful for Rowling's sacrifice for her brother Hagrid. Hagrid took Rowling back to the city to rest first. After Hagrid left with Rowling in his arms, Hater first glanced at the numerous white slaves standing together under the care of the fleet guards and sailors, looked at Olaf, and asked, "Child, you are doing well. I saw that we added 10 armed merchant ships. There are thousands of these white slaves, right?" Olaf turned around and pointed to the white slaves who were crowded behind him. He laughed and said, "Dad, these white slaves are 1,655, and this time the settlement fee is 1/5 of the previous one. Among them, Irish white slaves have 1,200 people, there are 380 Scottish white slaves, and the rest are Scottish white slaves and 5 Dutch white slaves." The so-called white slaves refer to contract slaves. Since the colonization of the last century, contract white slaves have appeared as a form of employment. However, it is the British who really carried forward contract white slaves, and now there is an additional Icelander still looking for Iceland. Rise free novels, Baidu direct search, it's easy to read novels, equals. Chapter 120, Everyone has a woman. Since the 16th century, the United Kingdom has maintained stable development all the year after reunification. By the beginning of the 17th century, the population of Great Britain doubled to more than 5 million. If we add the more than 2 million people in Ireland, that would be it has a population of more than 8 million people. This is already the most populous country in Europe that has just experienced the Black Death, and it is the 4th largest country after France, the Holy Roman Empire, and Spain. However, the size of the United Kingdom is far less than these 3 countries. Therefore, the United Kingdom is already facing the invalid problem of less people, more land, and insufficient resources. Therefore, the United Kingdom vigorously developed the navy and maritime plunder to increase national strength and wealth during the reign of Elizabeth I. Advocating people to be pirates to reduce population pressure is a kind of disguised transfer of employment and re-employment. However, this method addresses the symptoms but not the root cause. As the population increases, domestic inflation, excess human resources, and serious land annexation issues have gradually made the rule of the British royal family become unstable. In the 17th century, Britain vigorously developed overseas colonies and established the East India Company and the West India Company. It wanted to reduce the population of the island through overseas colonization, and also use the cheap resources of the colony to transfer the island to stabilize the country. Therefore, the beginning of British colonial history was actually forced by the expansion of the population and the annexation of the land. Therefore, Hagrid and Olaf wanted to hire contracted white slaves, only in England and Scots-speaking Ireland, the most convenient and even the cheapest. If a British caravan company hires white slaves, you can get a white slave with 6 or 7 years of free labor without even the cost of a copper plate. After all, Hagrid and the others are not British natives. If they want to recruit white slaves, they must go through local merchants, landlords, etc. They will not help Hagrid in vain. So the name settling down has appeared. After Olaf's report, Hader learned that the goods of Hagrid and Olaf's 6 large ships were sold clean in Ireland, England, Scotland, Amsterdam and other places, earning a total of more than 4 million guilders, and then bought it again. He had 10 armed merchant ships and 3,000 matchlocks and 500 new-style muskets, plate armor, bows and arrows, swords and ammunition, and countless weapons and equipment, and also recruited 1,653 contracted white slaves. The money was spent 7 or 4 million guilders are comparable to the current annual income of the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company. However, the 2 companies have to hire a lot of employees, and the long-distance transportation expenses are also large, so it really falls the money in the hands of company executives is less than 1/3. But because Hader is in full control of Wenland, a large amount of resources are under his control, so 90% of the goods mobilized are his personal wealth or the wealth of his family, and the expenditure for acquiring wealth is pressured by the colonized slaves. In his body, the income of more than 4 million guilders is almost entirely owned by Hader. Although the wealth that Hader acquired this year is comparable to a colonial company built by the power of a country, it is indeed very unstable, and in some respects it can be regarded as exhausted because this year's more than 4 million Dutch revenues are entirely from the sales of fur, royal jelly, dried fish, wood and other commodities from the 6 fleets of Hager and Olaf. Among them, skins and beavers account for the largest proportion. Rare furs such as skins, mink, wolf, bear, reindeer, seal, etc., can be said that more than half of the 4 million are derived from mass for sales. The area of Vinland is larger than that of Iceland. The environment makes it richer in resources. There are also many wetland forests and mountains and rivers. Moreover, there are few indigenous people in Vinland, and the lifestyle is very backward, which makes Vinland's wild animals very rich and almost inexhaustible. But after Heir arrived in Vinland the year before last, the Vikings began to slaughter and capture wild animals on a large scale. Traps, bows and muskets, planned on large-scale hunting, advanced weapons and tools, and skilled hunters who persevere in hunting have caused Vinland's original colorful and expansive wildlife resources to decline sharply, and the number of various animals such as beavers, foxes, white wolves, black bears, and reindeer has dropped sharply. Although the hunting of animals is rare after the weather has changed, people have felt that the number of animals on the island has decreased a lot compared with last year and the year before. If the hunting and killing efficiency lasted for half a year from the beginning of autumn to early spring, the wild animal resources on Vinland Island would be wiped out within 10 years. After buying weapons and ships, the remaining money also bought cattle, horses, pigs, sheep and other livestock, chickens, ducks, geese, rabbits, and other livestock and poultry, as well as food, beer, whiskey, etc. Europe spent the money cleanly, and in the end almost no gold coins were brought back. There were almost no children and old people among the white slaves recruited this time. They were all young people who couldn't survive and asked to travel to the New World to find a way to survive. More than 400 people are married. The remaining 600 people are adult young men and teenagers, and more than 600 people are young unmarried women or widowed or divorced women. There are now 2,000 Vikings in Vinland and tens of thousands of slaves. Because of the massacre of the Conquest War, there were more women than men in the slaves, but it was not very serious. However, the male-to-female ratio of Viking whites is seriously imbalanced. Among the more than 800 whites, only 200 are women. Excluding underage males, nearly 500 adult males are single. The dispensation of the alienation alleviated the physical needs, and many slaves even became pregnant. However, for the white Vikings from the civilized world, they did not want to marry a primitive native who even spoke Icelandic as a wife at present. A white Viking woman without a family has to face 10 times the number of male pursuits. The white Viking male who is completely unsatisfied for a long time will eventually combine with indigenous women to have children and start a family. It is foreseeable that if a large number of white women are not moved in, there will be more and more mixed descendants of Vinland in a few decades. Before Hagrid and Olaf traveled in early April, Heir and Hudik, Olaf, Heine, Jod and many others thought that there would be more and more indigenous people, indigenous and white hybrids among the Vikings in the future. In order to ensure the dominance of whites, at least the number and status of whites in the first 2 generations must be in dominance. So Hagrid and Olaf brought back some white women to solve for the lower half of the single Viking whites and the second half of their lives. At the same time, Vinland's population can be increased as quickly as possible. Self-reproduction and external adjustment must be the 2 pillars necessary to ensure the productivity and the soundness of the Viking leading system. In the early stage of Vinland's development, after all the white slaves were set up, another cocktail party was held in Grote. Then in the morning of the next day, Heir brought a dozen high-level Vikings, including Hagrid, Jod, and Olaf. General Assembly. More than 2,000 Vikings gathered in the square in front of Heir Fort. Heir promoted the brilliant achievements made by Vinland and Heir in the past few years. At the same time, he announced that all single men among the Viking whites could get a single Irish female slave as a spouse. Heir's decision made that cheers resounded in the city of Grote. www.uxiaspit.com. At the same time, more than 500 men like wild wolves looked eagerly at the female slaves not far away, and their eyes were almost red. There are more than 600 female contract slaves, but only more than 500 single white slaves. This time, the needs can be fully met. However, Heir, as the general of Viking Thunder, could not do charity. The youngest and beautiful more than 100 female slaves were selected, and the rest were also distinguished according to their height, appearance and age. Any white Viking can choose his own wife, but the prices of female slaves of different grades vary. To get a most ordinary female slave, the white Vikings had to pay a slave to dissolve the 8-year service contract, or directly pay the same amount of money if it is a more beautiful female slave. While paying the cost of canceling the service contract, there will be additional costs. Even when the top female slaves are allocated, there will be auctions. Still looking for Iceland Rise free novels? Baidu direct search, it's easy to read novels, equals. Chapter 121, Wenland still has great potential. After half a day of fierce competition, more than 100 young female slaves of the highest quality were auctioned off by Viking soldiers and unmarried production captains. They all paid the price of 10 slaves, most of which were temporarily owed to Hader. The remaining female slaves were all looted. After this morning's looting, the problem of the imbalance between men and women that plagued the city of Winlandred has been alleviated. Especially the Viking whites, everyone has a family. The Vikings got their wives, and Hader did not compensate. He gained deeper support and gratitude from the Vikings, and at the same time became the creditor of most of the Vikings. In addition to the Viking whites, there are also many Vikings of Vedic origin who have not married. They also waved the fur in their hands to fight for the whites to pick the remaining female slaves. These white-skinned female slaves are among the indigenous people. The Vikings of origin are the most beautiful in the eyes if they can marry a white woman. They think that their next generation will have noble white blood, and the future generations will be the same as other Viking whites. The indigenous people of Wenland, and even the indigenous people of North America, at this time, almost all of them are from Kazakhstan and Europe. They are a kind of resistance to Europeans who are tall, have white skin, and possess powerful force and advanced technology. In the heart of envy, the slaves on Wenland Island are envy and worship. Of course, there are few people who are hate, but they can only bury it deeply in my heart nowadays. Even white slaves in Wenland despise Vedic slaves, so many people just vent their animal desires on their native female slaves. They don't even want to marry a native female slave as a wife. This is similar to the future American manner. The Lord treated black slaves similarly after looting. The remaining 100 white female slaves also became the wives of the Viking Reds, of Indian origin, but they paid more than the Viking whites. The current marriage problem between the Viking whites and the Viking celebrities has been solved, and Hader and Hagrid are relieved. Whether the Vikings can form a family and multiply their offspring is the core issue, especially Viking whites, because they are the core force of Hader. Only by constantly strengthening the Viking whites will Hader's position become more and more stable. 600 single female white slaves were taken away by men, but there were more than 1,000 white slaves. Among these white slaves, 200 were relocated with their families, and 800 were 15 to 3 years old. Young and middle-aged people between the ages of 15 are the fresh blood to enrich the Viking soldiers. After the Everybody Has a Woman link, Caddock stood up and announced that the Viking soldiers had expanded their enrollment, and that the Viking soldiers were in need of auxiliary militias. Then all the 900 males in this batch of white slaves were transferred to militias. The famous Dutch white slaves were appointed as production team leaders because they were proficient in leather making, windmill making, and fishing techniques. The 900 white slave militias, all made up of men, adopted a military-civilian combination in the farming system. Hader prepared to allocate a huge piece of land for them in the northern part of the peninsula, so that they would lead the indigenous slaves to open up land and build ports, and conduct military training and training. Normal production, because now the construction of the city of Groot has been completed. The city of Groot does not need too much population. More than 10,000 people staying in the city of Groot not only caused a surplus of labor, but also caused excessive consumption of food. On the contrary, it is better to move some people to build another city in the north. In the end, 900 men were organized into 9 atoms, with the capable Vikings as the heads, and directly responsible to Hader. Hudic was far away in the Basque city, and Caddock was responsible for the military training of the white slave militias. Yod is responsible for the daily production of the white slave militia. The return of the fleet in the summer of 1629 first brought back the news that Denmark was completely defeated and signed a peace treaty with the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II and completely withdrew from the European war. This news made Hader and others very happy. Because Dan King was defeated, it meant that the current Danish vitality was severely injured, and there was no strength to support the war across the sea in a short period of time. In a few years, he would return to Iceland to avenge himself and lead Iceland to become independent. Denmark is also very difficult to organize naval and army forces to suppress it. While bringing good news, the fleet also brought a huge number of weapons and equipment and more than 100 and 600 white slaves to Wenland. This greatly increased the number of white people and brought Wenland's white population to 2004. The number of more than 100 people, although still a little less than the natives, has greatly eased the dilemma that Hader faced with the availability of 5 people. As long as these more than 1,000 whites actively perform, in order to end the contract time, becoming Vikings is just around the corner, and if they have more ability, they will be able to become superior. In addition to the white slaves, Hagrid and Olaf have hired mineral exploration professionals, shipbuilders, and ironworkers in Scotland, England, Ireland, and Amsterdam. In this era, there is no concept and awareness of intellectual property rights, and there is not enough respect for technical personnel. It can be said that technical personnel in other industries have the same status as farmers, and of course their income is higher than that of farmers, but in any case, skilled workers do not have social status. They are still workers who work for large businessmen in large companies. If they are not careful, they will lose their jobs. The conditions given by Hagrid and Olaf were excellent, 3 times the income of the workers in Europe. They quit their jobs without thinking and followed the fleet to Winland on the 3rd day. The leaders such as Heir and Yacht took time to meet with more than 30 technicians. After inquiring, they found that they had solid knowledge in their respective fields, so they ordered Yacht and Hosker to be responsible for helping these professions. They established a shipyard in the port and at the same time performed repairs and maintenance on 2 captured British armed merchant ships under the protection of the escorts. The mineral survey personnel left the city of Harald and went to every corner of Winland to search for mine resources. Entering Winland in July 1629, the military strength has increased several times compared with that in the spring. Heir was influenced by Olaf, and the designated Vinland's development policy was the Songan policy. Not only did it give priority to the development of the military, but also gave up the manor style and governor style to manage the people and slaves. The basic core system of government, soldiers, slavery, tribal system, and other hodgepodge systems, all military and civilians are strictly managed, and the means of production and life are also managed and distributed uniformly. After successive victories, Heir has already developed blind confidence in Viking Raiden. He believes that Olaf helped him imitate the Viking ancestor system to integrate the power of the entire population very effectively, allowing Vinland to burst out with powerful energy. The people who were sent out to do business last month also returned. The French and the British didn't buy much, but many remote Aboriginal tribes exchanged their gold and silver jewelry, fur, and gems for a lot of pottery, woodenware, stoneware and exquisite leather clothing, novel-style leather shoes and linen cloth, etc. This half-month transaction allowed Herat City to sell thousands of various appliances, leather clothes, shoes and linen cloth, and harvest more than 1,000 pieces of fur and more than 50 marks of gold, which is also a very profitable business. The only flaw is that the purchasing power of the savages is limited, and the next transaction I am afraid it will be next year, looking at the 18, including 2 captured ships in the port, and then at the mountains of long guns, ammunition, plate armor, crossbows, and swords in the warehouse. Heir's ambitions kept swelling. More and more confident in the future, it seems that the creation of a country in North America is not a fantasy. Now Heir, as the actual controller of Vinland, the general of Viking Raid, and the lord of Harut, is already a big man who controls 1.11 million square kilometers. Iceland has an area of 1.03 million square kilometers. Not only is its area not as good as Vinland, but its environmental resources are also far worse than Vinland. It can be said that when comparing the two places, Iceland is currently stronger than Vinland in population and animal husbandry. If compared from the economic income, the annual income of 50,000 or 60,000 people from planting, breeding, fishing, and even robbery in Iceland is less than 1/3 of the income of Vinland this year. Even the governor of Iceland, Karlsson, does not embezzle a penny. Iceland's annual tax revenue is only a few 100,000 silver marks, up to 1 million Dutch guilders. If you subtract expenditures, you will get even less. However, Vinland's income this year is 4 million Dutch guilders, which is several times that of Iceland. Of course, there are many reasons for cherishing local products, but in any case, Heir's money and strength have long surpassed the governor of Iceland. This caused the fire of revenge in his heart to slowly burn. Although Iceland currently has 50,000 to 60,000 people, according to Vinland's current development momentum, within 5 years, perhaps the population will surpass Iceland with Vinland and the North American continent as bases. Heir's family will soon have huge wealth, and then use the wealth to build colonies, develop and grow, and finally have the possibility to visit the Europa continent. www.uxiaspit.com. Sometimes Heir etc. People will discuss their own success after drinking. It is one aspect of the courage and good fighting of the whole team. What is more important is the selection of colonies and the relative weakness of the colonized nations. For example, there are indigenous slaves in New France and New England, but Winland, because it is an isolated island and has an army that keeps hunting and sweeping, the Aboriginals cannot escape after being enslaved, nor dare to escape. So, Many times, even Hader, Hagrid, Olaf, Houdic and others thought in their hearts that it was a blessing from God, allowing everyone to rule the vast land of Wenland smoothly and easily compared to other colonists in any case, simply judging from the development trajectory after Hader led his people to Vinland. Perhaps Hader's family is really God's favorite family, or Wenland is an island favored by God. But it's just that Hader's family was catch it every time it meets. Hader thought that he couldn't help being slightly proud, and then he thought to himself when he would counterattack Iceland. Still looking for Iceland Rise free novels, Baidu direct search, it's easy to read novels, equals. Chapter 122, Agricultural Policy Book. When Hader's aspirations rose in his heart, Jod and Hoskeld had left the city of Herat with white slave militias, 3,000 indigenous slaves, and more than half of the livestock, and went to the north of the peninsula, preparing to find out during the investigation. Build a city on the west or south side of the natural harbor. This harbor is a banana-shaped bay. The relatively narrow strait in the interior is a natural barrier for the harbor. The space in front of the haven is vast and the underwater is extremely deep. It can be regarded as a natural deep-water harbor, a haven and a strategically advantageous port. Olaf guessed after seeing the topographical sketches that the location they chose might be the later capital of Newfoundland and Labrador, St. John, but it certainly can't be called by this name anymore. Hader named the new location and future port city Hader. When they set off in Jod after Ian and Hoskerd left, the population of Groot was reduced by 30%, and it seemed a little deserted. However, Hader had already sent someone to Bakken City, ready to let Blackstone transfer some of the native slaves he had taken. On July 7th, it was rainy and overcast. Although it's summer, the temperature in Herat City is still a bit shady. People don't feel hot flashes when they wear two-layer linen robes. If it is in the north of Wenland, they should wear leather robes. This is because of Wenland, too close to the North Pole, but also because of the influence of the Little Ice Age. Olaf hasn't heard anything outside the window these days, and has been studying two books that Jurf brought back from Amsterdam in his own office in the factory. When Olaf was in Amsterdam, he went to the bank to look for Guyi, and he was about to fulfill his appointment early summer last year. Last summer, Olaf and Guyi, who worked in the bank, agreed to a business relationship. Olaf ordered a large number of basic medicines such as radix satidus and honeysuckle, dozens of sets of porcelain, as well as compendium of materia medica, agricultural policy Kwanshu, and Cheyenne Going Kwu from Kui, who is about to go to Batavia, Jakarta. Olaf met Kui's assistant, a capable young man, at the bank. He brought back most of the things Olaf needed, but he didn't find Cheyenne Going Kwu and agricultural policy Kwanshu a large number of Far Eastern medicinal materials, porcelain, silk, and several books cost Olaf nearly 100,000 guilders. Fortunately, this year's income is enough. Of course, the most expensive of this batch of goods are dozens of sets of exquisite porcelain and 10 silks. Although Olaf was a little disappointed that he did not buy Heavenly Creations, he was also a gem of the draft finalization of Compendium of Materia Medica Nongsheng Kwanshu. Compendium of Materia Medica is a guidebook of traditional Chinese pharmacy compiled by the sage Li Shizhen for 30 years. This book contains 1,892 kinds of medicines, of which more than 1,000 medicines are equipped with pictures, and there are more than 11,000 treatments. The disease is attached to the prescription. Olaf started from the health of himself and his family. He was most interested in this book. The primitive continent of North America must have hundreds of drugs similar to or the same as those in the Compendium of Materia Medica. If you train some pharmacists, you will get it in the future. Headaches, fever and other diseases can be cured afterwards. Instead of waiting for self-healing or being treated by bleeding and craniotomy. If Compendium of Materia Medica is regarded by Olaf as a guidebook for health and life-saving, prepare to learn and select smart and clever people to teach it to train pharmacists. Then the Nongsheng Kwanshu is Olaf's guideline for the takeoff of Wenland's agriculture. Only by obtaining the Nongsheng Kwanshu can we master the world's most advanced planting techniques and various food and economic crops such as cotton, sweet potatoes, wheat, rice, and mulberry. Advanced techniques such as planting, management, breeding, and improvement. At present, the European agricultural planting and breeding technology is primitive and backward, and the breeding is completely dependent on grazing and free-range breeding, and there is no way to deal with animal diseases. The planting technique is not even compatible with Daming's shoes in the absence of natural disasters. Daming's planting and harvesting ratio is now between 125 and 140. This is still affected by the Little Ice Age, and output has declined. However, in European countries during the same period, The ratio of grain planting and harvesting was between 1, 2 and 1, 4. Of course, most of them were the latter. In layman's terms, it means to plant 1 caddy of wheat seeds. Because the land is barren and fertile, farmers in Ming Dynasty will harvest 25 to 40 caddies of grain, but European farmers can only harvest 2 to 4 caddies of grain through the output. We can see how big the gap between European planting technology and Ming is. This gap is reflected in various aspects such as seed selection, management, and fertilization. The most obvious and simplest difference is that the peasants of the Chinese dynasty have long learned a series of methods to increase soil fertility, such as manure collection, fermentation, and fertilization. However, Europeans have not yet mastered the technology of making manure into fertilizer to enhance soil fertility and increase grain production. The best Nordic Viking farmers only rely on the natural decomposition of cattle and sheep grazing excrement that falls on the rotating ground to increase soil fertility in a small amount. Olaf also knew the importance of farmyard manure in his previous life, so in the past 2 years of urban management, every household had to build toilets. At the same time, slaves were asked to collect human and animal manure, wheat waste, food residues, etc., and add water to make them heat up and ferment, and finally mixed with soil and sprinkled into the fields. So last year's autumn harvest was a bumper harvest. Yacht discovered that the manure fertilizer proposed by Olaf was really effective, and it was also vigorously promoted this year. Not surprisingly, this year's autumn harvest was another bumper harvest. Olaf secretly estimated in his heart that with the help of farm manure, not to mention potatoes and sweet potatoes, even rye, oats, etc., will double the previous yields, estimated to reach 1.8 or even 1.10. Not a problem. The root of agriculture is fertilizer. Without fertilizer, there is no way to increase production. Olaf racked his brains and could only take out the farmyard manure that he had tainted in his previous life to increase Vinland's grain production. But the magic weapon that can really help Vinland's overall agricultural level is to improve. Search from Sugwonki's Nongshengquanshu. KIE's assistant only handed Olaf an engraved compendium of materia medica and some handwritten books. When Olaf learned that Yi had not found Sugwonki's Nongshengquanshu and Song Yinxing's heavenly creations, he was very disappointed at first, but became excited again after seeing these manuscripts: sweet potatoes sparse, jibba sparse, turnips sparse, northern janglu, dung digestion rules, Yikan order, agricultural relics, cotton planting law. 8 books of varying thickness were bound together and named drafts of agricultural books. This draft is a treasure of dilution in Olaf's eyes. The middle and long articles in the book are all directional agricultural technical articles written by Sugwonki. However, some of them were later published when the Nongshengquanshu was published. They have been deleted, and some have been modified and incorporated into other articles, but these manuscripts all reflect Sugwonki's early experience in agronomy, and even his insights after practice. Olaf didn't know why he didn't find the agricultural policy Quanshu. Instead he found the contents of other agricultural books written by Sugwonki. He believed that these should be part of the agricultural policy Quanshu, so he felt that it was enough for the time being. When Olaf handed these manuscripts to him the day before yesterday, KIE's assistant said that it was Qui's many missionaries who had always lived in the Ming dynasty who were respected or even granted official status by writing to ask for all the items on Olaf's list. As a result, everything was quickly enough and shipped to Macau. But Nongshengquanshu and Xiangong Ku have not even heard of the most knowledgeable Father Guo Jujing. Father Guo Jujing and Sugwonki are old friends for many years. After inspecting the 2 books to no avail, they repeatedly confirmed that the Nongshengquanshu is written by Sugwonki. www.wuxiaspit.com, so they wrote to Sugwonki personally. Sugwonki's compilation of agricultural books is not a secret, because the writing of the book is one of the 3 pursuits of Confucian students, so he is not surprised that Father Guo Jujing knew that he had written agricultural, but the name of Nongshengquanshu is very strange. After a brief summary, Sugwonki sent some of the draft articles he had compiled and questions about geometric knowledge and doubts about the name of Nongshengquanshu to Father Guo Jujing. Guo Jujing immediately copied a copy of the drafts of agricultural books with Confucian believers who converted to Catholicism, and then sent a copy of the copy to KIE. The original copy was left for research and translation, and Sugwonki's agricultural works were prepared for thorough research. The translation is accurate and then sent back to Europe. Once Qui got the manuscript, he packaged it with other goods and sent it back to Amsterdam via the East India Company's merchant ship, asking his assistant to leave his contact information at the bank to wait for delivery. And then Olaf appeared to complete the transaction. Still looking for Iceland Rise free novels? Baidu direct search, it's easy to read novels, equals. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 123, Eye-Opener. Olaf is basically ignorant of Chinese medicine, so I read Compendium of Materia Medica as an encyclopedia of herbs and even other items, but Olaf Sugwonki's 7 agricultural books were carefully studied, and he read them very slowly, and he had to take notes and even mark them while reading them. When Olaf was reading Compendium of Materia Medica and drafts of agricultural books, he also faced a previously overlooked problem, that is, the text in these books is all traditional Chinese, while Olaf has only learned simplified Chinese in his previous life. Chinese can be said and understood very little, so when reading, you will be faced with many unrecognized complicated characters, but most of the unrecognized traditional characters Olaf can always guess the meaning of the sentence, but repeated reading makes Olaf's reading speed extremely slow. I finished reading Compendium of Materia Medica in a few days. Olaf read the Compendium of Materia Medica and put it down temporarily. He feels that reading the Compendium of Materia Medica has improved his understanding of traditional characters to a new level, which will play a certain auxiliary role in the next step in reading agricultural books: sweet potato dredging, jibby dredging, turnip dredging, North Janglu, dung digestion rules, Yikan order, agricultural relics dredging, cotton planting law. The knowledge in the draft of the agricultural book is rich, and Olaf feels that he has benefited a lot after reading it, especially on sweet potato planting, turnip planting, manure production and treatment, wasteland reclamation, cotton planting, etc. These knowledge can instantly turn wetland into agriculture. The knowledge of a powerful country wetland's topography is complex, with plateau mountains in the middle and shangling mountains in the west and northwest. Forests, rivers and wetlands can be seen everywhere, and the northern climate is extremely cold, so the best agricultural project in wetland is actually grazing. The sporadic plains, river valleys, and northern ridges in the south can be planted, but there are not too many land suitable for reclaiming wasteland. If calculated according to the backward European planting technology, after decades of time all the wasteland is reclaimed and planted, it can support up to 4 food rations for 50,000 people. But now Olaf and Heir have adopted a large number of potatoes and sweet potatoes to increase their food production. Even 1/10 of the land is enough to feed tens of thousands of people. According to the plan of Viet, the entire southeast peninsula is 7 or 8,000 acres of land can be developed in 3 years, enough to support the rations of all Vikings and slaves in Wenland. Sweet Potato Sparse explains the cultivation techniques of sweet potatoes very comprehensively. The fur is much deeper than Olaf knows, which brings Olaf's understanding of sweet potato cultivation to a higher level. He translated it into Icelandic and gave it to Heir, and then after Heir asked Heine to transcribe 2 copies, 1 copy was sent to the northern city of Heir, and the remaining 2 copies were summoned to start learning and training. They plan to dig some sweet potatoes and potatoes this summer and expand them according to the most advanced planting technology. For planting, we set aside more than 100 acres of vegetable fields where parsnips, beets, and radishes were picked for experiments. Jibbai. Shurikard Sugwonki's cultivation techniques for jibbai, cotton, which was introduced to China during the Song and Yuan dynasties and began to grow in large numbers of Asian cotton. Cotton is used to weave cotton cloth to make clothes, which is very comfortable. Olaf sees it extremely serious, because the current market in Europe is basically linen cloth, and cotton cloth is still a high-end product from the Middle East. If Vinland can grow cotton and woven cotton cloth, it will bring huge benefits in the future. Turnip talks about the various techniques of turnip planting. Turnips are also called vine, cabbage head, round root. The planting method and shape are similar to that of white radish, but the meat is harder and has less water, which can be compared with potatoes. Sweet potatoes are the same as the staple food, and they can also be used to pickle pickles and make vegetables. They are of high edible value. Later generations were rich in food, and turnips were rarely sold as fresh vegetables in the market, and most of them were made into fresh vegetables such as rutabaga and lump vegetables. Olaf emphasized that turnips are introduced in the turnip sparse. They are planted in summer and can be harvested before and after the frost in winter, which is more than 3 months, and the yield is higher than that of sweet potatoes. 1 acre of land can harvest 10,000 caddies of fresh turnip rhizomes, as well as 5,000 caddies of stems and leaves. Of course, this data must be guaranteed by fertilization, otherwise it must be reduced by half. Olaf looked at the illustrations and knew that turnips are also found in Europe, and even Icelanders cultivate them, but most of them eat leaves, and it is uncertain whether the roots can be eaten. Olaf believes that turnip is another high-yield crop suitable for Wenland. It is also a high-yield ration for the development of cultivation of stems and leaves, pickling of the roots and pickles and sun-dried storage for food. Picking up a pen and writing down the key points of turnip thinning in a small notebook, Olaf decided to tell his father that he could find some turnip seeds for experimental planting, and something should be harvested before the new year if it can achieve the high yields mentioned in turnip. The planting can be promoted on a large scale next year. Beijing Lurikard Sugwonki's experience and observations when he was in Tianjin. Tianjin's climate is a few degrees warmer than Herat City, but the hole is close, so it has a precious reference value for Wenland's agricultural production. The 3 articles of rules of manure retention, cultivation order, and agricultural relics are more precious. The former introduces the methods of manure collection and fermentation, as well as the application conditions and advantages and disadvantages of water and dry fertilizers for farm manure. The latter refers to the cultivation of wasteland, the development of soil fertility, and coping with changes in the disaster year, as well as the current planting adjustment rules for the climate of the Little Glacier. The cotton planting law is the best way to make money in this era. This article is about Western varieties of cotton, which is the Sea Island cotton originating in South America. The quality of Sea Island cotton is far better than that of Daming for 200 years. Asian cotton is currently the best variety for spinning. Olaf decided to introduce Sea Island cotton and plant it in large quantities in the Americas. Vinland's land climate is not suitable for planting cotton. The best location should be the vast plain south of Quebec City. Cotton is one of the most economically valuable plants in this era. Cotton is planted in spring. Only after the seedlings survive can they be planted in the ground separately, and then the cotton is picked at the end of autumn. Cotton lint can be used to make quilts and cotton cloth. Cotton seeds can be squeezed into oil for consumption. The stalks are solid and are the best fuel for firewood. It can be said that cotton is a treasure all over, and it is a weapon that can improve people's living standards. There are dozens of fabrics in the world, but the basic categories are linen, gouache, kapok, silk, cashmere, cotton, etc. At present, the most expensive and most comfortable clothes in the world are made of silk and cotton. Although cotton is less expensive than silk, it is far more expensive than linen cloth due to backward agriculture in Europe. The arable land has been planted with food. Basically, there is no experience and history in growing cotton. Cotton is currently imported entirely, and the price is second only to silk. The rise of the British Empire in the future will be supported by the Indian indigenous people's hard-working cultivation of sugarcane, grain, cotton and even drugs. www.wuxiaspit.com. Otherwise, with the size of the British Isles, there will be no world-class power, even in other colonies. The role is far inferior to India 100 years later. Relying on the continuous expansion of the British Indian colony, the output of cotton also increased greatly. The support of cheap raw materials made the British textile industry flourish. Then in the early 19th century, the British began to grow cotton in large quantities in the Americas and then make cotton cloth. After sales, it has become the world's second only cotton exporter to China. Olaf believes that since he has led the British colonization in the Americas, he can find a way to get some Huangdaopo spinning wheels from Daming, and then grow cotton and spin cotton in the Americas, and become a world-class cotton exporting country. The wealth he will gain will be 10 times or more than 100 times the current income of Wenland nowadays. The efficiency of Chinese textile machines is far better than that of European textile machines. It will take more than 100 years for Europe to catch up with China in textile efficiency. Only after the advent of Jenny textile machine did the textile industry in Europe flourish, especially in the United Kingdom. Still looking for Iceland Rise free novels? Baidu direct search, it's easy to read novels, equals. Chapter 124, Agricultural High-Speed Train. Busy days always pass quickly. The time entered the end of July. Olaf spent more than a month reading the draft of the agricultural book, and sometimes he discussed with Ott, Hader and others, and even gave a lecture to the old planting veterans in the city once a week. Manure fertilizer, sweet potato planting, food management, land reclamation and other agricultural knowledge, the wisdom of thousands of years from the Far Eastern dynasty, has made the Viking farmers listen with gusto. They only now know their backwardness and ignorance in agriculture. Who would have thought that the dirty and smelly feces could be collected and processed to become a high-yield baby? If this was said by an aboriginal, the Vikings would guarantee that the speaker's head would be filled with feces and urine in an instant. The more Olaf studied the draft of the agricultural book, the more interested he became in agricultural knowledge. Now he has read the articles in the draft 3 times and still feels unsatisfactory. Every time he reads it, he will feel his heart in the beginning. Olaf was able to recognize more than 80% of the traditional characters of drafts of agricultural books, and the combined sentences did not affect the understanding of the meaning. Then he translated it into Icelandic and gave it to Heir. At that time I have read a lot now, and the remaining new words have been combined with the upper and lower sentences to figure out 7 or 788, and the translation has been overhauled once in July. The city of Grode and the city of Heir in the north of the peninsula, under the leadership of Heir, Yada and others, began to lead farmers to learn advanced agricultural knowledge according to the agriculture book translated by Olaf. At the same time, they learned about the excrement in the toilet. For cleaning and storage, huge manure pits are dug out for unified storage and fermentation, and then most of the processed manure is air-dried according to the instructions of the agricultural manual. Due to the limited manure, only 1/3 of the land in the city of Grode can be irrigated with manure this year. Olaf has great confidence in the output of this 1/3 of the land in a few months because Heir city is in a newly built state. The fields are not reclaimed too much, except that the land that was reclaimed at the beginning is planted with vegetables, and the rest are transplanted with sweet potato stems. Although the time is a bit tight, Heir still has a lot to gain this winter sweet potato because Olaf has blown the agricultural book into a mysterious agricultural technology guidebook that can feed hundreds of millions of people in the East. The Vikings are convinced of the agricultural book, and Heir, Yada and others are also about whether there will be a bumper harvest this year. Confidence. Sometimes Olaf had a certain illusion when he saw the yellow-skinned slaves dig out the dung from each house and pour it into the fermentation point. That is, he was in daiming and saw that the ancient Chinese were engaged in agriculture. Produce many contents of draft book of agriculture broke Olaf's one-sided knowledge of agriculture. In addition to the fertility planting difference between water and dry manure in the manure rules, it also introduced several other fertilizers, such as bone meal, using animal bones. Bone meal made by crushing and sprinkled into the field can increase grain yield by twice as much as dry manure. Olaf knows that bone meal is rich in phosphorus, potassium, calcium and other elements. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are the basic fertilizers for later generations to increase production. Although bone meal is not as high as chemical fertilizer, it is enough to double the production. Olaf knows that when soybeans are planted, the roots of soybean vegetation will release nitrogen in the soil. If the land is no longer in rotation after planting grains, but a crop of soybeans, cowpea, etc. are planted to fix nitrogen, and grains are planted in the next year, the land will still remain. There will be good fertility, as long as the manure, bone meal, plant ash, etc. are added every year. It will surely ensure that all arable land is constantly high yield. After putting away his books, Olaf began to focus on guiding the fertilizer production in the city. He asked the manure workers to collect the feces from each household and also to cook and warm each household and burn the wood ashes. Collected, these wood ash also has a good amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that can be mixed with feces for use. At the same time, the gills, fish intestines, fish scales and other wastes that are not used in the sun-dried fish are also poured with the feces to heat and ferment. Animal organs and fish scales are also excellent fertilizers, as well as the bones left over from eating meat. It must be crushed and mixed into the manure pit, so as to enhance the fertility and fertilizer quantity of the fertilizer. After Olaf knew it, the city of Grode entered a thrifty life mode for the whole people. There was almost no domestic garbage that could not be used to make fertilizer. Even worn-out rags and rotten clothes could be burned into ashes and poured into the dung pit to make fertilizer. Olaf knows very well that if Finland's agricultural planting masters the use of fertilizers, the future output increase by 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 7 or 8 times is not a fantasy or myth. It can be said that he has gained advanced agricultural knowledge from the Heavenly Dynasty. The blessed Wedlin has already boarded the high-speed train of agricultural development. How far he can go in the future depends on the leader's ability. At the very least, Olaf's phrase "accumulate manure and increase production" became the slogan of the people of Grode and Heir in the second half of 1629 and affected the lives of generations. In addition to guiding fertilizer production, Olaf will also go to the factory to take a look at bone china firing, pottery firing, wood making and many other jobs. Because of the small number of workers, the current and future demand for daily necessities in Groot and Hader is very large. The temporarily produced items have been bought by his own people. Even if the domestic demand is met in the future, the external sales will not be able to buy the price. Olaf does not expect pottery, wood, leather goods, etc. to make money. Olaf's real-earning product with high hopes is bone china. Olaf doesn't know how to make porcelain. He just told the potters what materials are needed to make bone china, and the potters have been exploring, and after thousands of failures, most of them are flawed even if the furnace is open twice a day. But recently, it has been possible to produce one piece of bone china with complete appearance every day. Sometimes two pieces. The potters make fine adjustments after each firing, but after all, they rely purely on experience. They clearly told Olaf that they may not be able to increase the success rate of bone china firing for the time being. Olaf is satisfied with a success rate of 20 or more. He feels that even the official kills of Daming cannot guarantee that the porcelains fired in each furnace will be intact and flawless, although the Wendland official kill is compared with the official kill of Daming. There is still a gap of 108,000 miles in the kill, but Olaf is already satisfied. He thinks that if he wants to increase the success rate, he must really find workers who can make porcelain to participate. UUCanchu.com does not have the participation of experts, and the road to explore will be extremely tortuous and long. Although the success rate of bone china can satisfy Olaf for the time being, Olaf is very disgusted with the artistic aesthetics of potters. The bone china fired by these potters is always a model, with a big belly and a high bottleneck. With exaggerated patterns and unpretentious materials, the shapes and styles are Scandinavian style at first glance, without the nobility and elegance of porcelain at all. Olaf knew that it was impossible to make celestial porcelain by these illiterate craftsmen. You watch and explore together with a pottery craftsman, and then imitate these two sets of tea sets in a pair of vases. This style of pottery, even if the porcelain is burned, it can't be bought at a good price. Don't worry, master. Old Gelder was holding a porcelain bottle cautiously with a wine burp, and at the same time berating the craftsman to treat the porcelain carefully. Then he moved his eyes reluctantly from the porcelain bottle and said with a smile, "With the oriental porcelain you brought, it will be faked next month." Still looking for Iceland Rise free novels? Baidu direct search. It's easy to read novels. Equals. Chapter 125. Help you become a city lord. Olaf encouraged the craftsman a few words, and then left the factory holding the original and his own translation of drafts of agricultural books under his arm. Olaf walked into the inner city, his nose lingering from the faint smell of the distant cesspit. He knew that this was because of the construction of the new city built by a yacht. Most of the cattle and horses were gone, resulting in a shortage of livestock in Groot, so slaves had to carry manure barrels. The lack of power of the slaves caused inconvenience in the transportation of feces, which made the pit spots more and more dense, resulting in a somewhat poor air quality. However, Olaf thinks that this problem will be solved when the breeding of livestock increases next year. When the cesspit fermentation point is moved out of the city of Groot will be restored to its usual cleanliness and fresh air. Walking to the level streets paved with gravel in the inner city, Olaf saw Pastor McGonagall in a white robe walking around holding a Bible. Seeing Olaf approaching McGonagall with a surprised look, he said, "Olaf, I heard that you use manure to make fertilizers, which can increase food production. Is it true?" Olaf froze and asked, "Who did you hear? I have been wandering around the city without any problems these days, and I heard many people talk about the use of manure as fertilizer. They all said it was the wisdom you learned from the Damon Kingdom of the Far East." Olaf knew what McGonagall said, and knew that the people in the city had leaked the news. In the current era, there is no concept of intellectual property rights. Any new knowledge and technology cannot be kept secret for too long. The fertilizer issue is currently the biggest news in Harrod City. Vikings and white slaves are all talking about it, and McGonagall learned it is also normal. Olaf casually dealt with a couple of sentences and then changed the subject to ask if McGonagall lived in Harrod City. After 10 words, Olaf proved out McGonagall's customs, agriculture, and fishery in Harrod City. "I have a basic understanding of other industries and are very curious." McGonagall even asked Olaf to apply for a factory tour. Olaf believes that Vinland's agriculture, handicrafts, and sugar industries are the current core industries and industries to be protected, so he didn't respond to McGonagall's request at all. It was a polite farewell to leave, and as he walked, he was determined in his heart to send McGonagall away as soon as possible. That night, Hader and Olaf were sitting on the sofa and talking. Olaf shared his concerns and asked Hader to send McGonagall away as soon as possible, Mag knows what harm does Wenland's agricultural development do? He has no ability to harm us. You have to know whether he can survive or not depends on our attitude. Hader couldn't understand the second son's concern about the risk of the leakage of advanced agricultural technology, but he also considered Olaf's opinion after the father and son spoke for a while. Hader said, "Your brother wants us to help McGonagall regain the leadership of Plymouth City, so that we can take control of New England. We have also held a high-level meeting to discuss this issue. Everyone agreed to help McGonagall. Now that you think McGonagall is not suitable for staying in Herat City anymore, let's join the army as soon as possible and send him to Plymouth as the city lord as soon as possible." Hader's words were tepid, and the tone was light and gentle, but the words revealed unquestionable domineering and respect for Olaf's opinions. Olaf felt that his father's leadership became more and more obvious, and he was very happy, and then asked, "How much force do you plan to send to help McGonagall?" Hader scratched the beard of his left cheek, frowned for a moment, and said lightly, 500 Viking soldiers and 500 White Wolf warriors are enough." Olaf also agreed with approval. "Plymouth has only 1,000 people. We can send 500 Viking soldiers and 500 White Wolf soldiers to push Plymouth horizontally, and we can also deter them after tying Plymouth." "Dad, you think very much?" "Thoughtful." Hader laughed, and waved. "That's it. McGonagall, this general will send an army to help you become city lord, soon." Hader's order was passed from the castle after the heavy rain at the end of July ended. The air became warmer after entering August. The sky was clear and white clouds were blooming. This was a rare good weather. The 500 Viking soldiers and the 500 White Wolf soldiers gathered before Kadir led to Hader Fort. Hader ordered the slaves to carry out weapons such as muskets, plate armor, flying spears, and spears. After some encouragement, Kadir took Polly and Bjorn, two outstanding young men, to say goodbye to Hader. McGonagall also hurriedly bowed and saluted, and then Kadir and McGonagall, Polly and Bjorn rode horses. Leaving the city of Herat with the Viking soldiers, the 500 White Wolf soldiers escorted 10 bullock carts and all supplies to follow behind the Viking soldiers. More than 1,000 people took ox carts and supplies on board 5 armed merchant ships in the southern port and headed for the city of Plymouth on the east coast of America in the southwest. When Kadir led an army to help McGonagall regain the Plymouth Puritan rights, Olaf did not go to see him off. He was looking in the warehouse for various plant seeds he brought back from Europe last year and this year, hoping to find South American islands cottonseed or Mexican cottonseed, because apart from seeing cotton and cottonseed in his previous life, Wenland's people couldn't recognize which seed was cottonseed, so he had to look for it himself. Although Europe did not grow cotton in large quantities, the popular foods such as potatoes, sweet potatoes and tomatoes from the Americas have long been cultivated as ornamental plants by Europeans, and so is cotton. On both trips to Europe, he would buy a lot of plant seeds. Olaf looked carefully and found a bag of cotton seeds. He felt that the amount was too small, and even if they were all planted, they would not use 2 acres of land, but as long as they were planted, they would be cultivated for a long time. You will get more and more cotton seeds collecting the cotton seeds. Olaf remembered that he had already planted tomatoes successfully. This plant is currently regarded as an ornamental plant symbolizing love because of its bright red appearance. This year Olaf led his Eden to open up 10 acres. In the experimental field, corn, pumpkin, beans, and some tomatoes were also planted because the climate of Wenland is too cold. The current plant varieties, even the hardy varieties, cannot be planted in winter because they have not been improved, and the winter wheat Wenland, which is common in the northern part of the dynasty, does not have its roots at all at present. Wenland, like Europe, grows spring wheat and then harvests it in late autumn. Vegetable plants such as corn, squash, and carob are also planted around the early spring. The current corn has matured, and the pumpkins and beans have also produced plump fruits. High-level officials such as Olaf and Hader have even eaten roasted tender corn several times. The sweet taste and burnt aroma made everyone who had eaten their thumbs up. Then Hader and Yacht went to see the high yield in the field. I found that the yield of corn is indeed twice as high as that of wheat and rye, and they have decided to reduce wheat planting next year and expand the planting area of corn, pumpkin and carob this year. All the land that can be developed has been reclaimed and cultivated in the surrounding area of Herat City. However, it is properly considered to avoid diseases and disasters, but large areas of crops will be cut off. Growth City has adopted diversified planting. www.uxiaspit.com. Only 1/3 of potatoes and sweet potatoes are planted, and most of the remaining land is planted with rye, oats, wheat, and barley. and a small part is planted with corn and pumpkins. And beans in terms of varieties, before the improvement of wheat, the yield per mule lags far behind that of corn. If 20-30 caddies of seeds are also planted, the yield per mule of corn will reach 200 to 300 caddies. If it is planted in the early spring, it can even reach 400 to 500 caddies, but for wheat. But only about 100 caddies. The high yield of corn is due to the variety, as well as the benefits associated with pumpkin and beans. Pumpkin is a vine plant. Its wide leaves cover the roots of thin and tall corn, which prevents low weeds from receiving sunlight and cannot grow, thereby retaining the moisture and nutrients in the soil. At the same time, the beans will climb on the corn. Climbing, growth relieves nitrogen fixation in the roots, and increases the yield of corn and pumpkins. Therefore, the three sisters' companions play a role in helping each other, which not only ensures an increase in production and income, but also reduces the workload of farmers. In this era, they are well-deserved food kings. Still looking for Iceland Rise free novels? Baidu direct search, it's easy to read novels, equals. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.